Lower your hand, Mara. That ring is not going on your finger.
Lower your hand, Mara. That ring is not going on your finger. The voice of Seattle's most feared man echoed through the ballroom. 300 guests froze. Mara Whitmore was seconds away from accepting a ring she never wanted. Her father saw a deal. Her fiancé saw a trophy. Nolan Campbell, the man whose name made an entire city go quiet, saw what 300 guests chose not to see, a bruise on her wrist. She did not know it yet, but that night would not end with an engagement. By morning, the world would believe she belonged to Nolan Campbell, and within a week, she would find herself caught between family secrets and a love too passionate to escape, with the man who could stop an entire room, but couldn't leave his own house. Nolan Campbell ran the most powerful defense company in the country, but for 5 years, the most feared man in Seattle had not been able to cross his own front gate. Tonight, 300 guests had come to him instead. He was moving through the corridor when he saw her through the terrace glass, rain-dark garden. A man's hand closed around a woman's wrist, not gently. And above it, a face that was doing something Nolan recognized without wanting to. Holding. Her eyes were wet, her chin was up. The tears were losing, but the chin was winning, and something about that specific fight, that private, losing, stubborn fight, hit him somewhere behind the sternum before he could decide to let it. In 5 years, very few things had reached him before he could stop them. Her eyes did. His hand was already on the door. He pushed it open. Cold air, open space, distance. The particular kind that his body had spent 5 years deciding was unsafe. The roar started low at the base of his skull. His hand, the one not gripping the frame, began to shake. He stepped back. His fist came down against the doorframe once. Quiet, controlled. The kind of blow a man lands when the only person he is angry at is himself. "Damn it," he breathed. The door closed. Through the glass the man released her wrist, not gently, and said something low that pulled her shoulders in before she made herself straighten again. Nolan stood behind the glass and watched her straighten. Then the garden door swung open and she came through it at a near run. Wet hair, ruined silk, eyes that had almost lost the fight they'd been winning. Nolan didn't move, but his eyes found her before she'd taken 3 steps into the corridor. "Who are you?" he thought. The question moved through him before he could stop it. He kept walking toward the ballroom. The corridor carried him past a half-open sitting room, and he would have kept going, except the laugh stopped him. A woman's laugh, too soft, too close. Through the narrow opening, his nephew Preston, tonight's groom, with his assistant Kate pressed against the wall beside him. "Useless bastard," he muttered, and kept walking. The ballroom opened ahead of him. Conversations dropped by half a degree as he entered. Men who had been laughing a second earlier remembered their drinks. He took a whiskey from a passing tray. His eyes moved across the room, steady, the way they always did. But they hadn't found what they were looking for when it happened. Pale silk, fast steps, a collision neither of them saw coming, her shoulder against his arm, the impact sharp enough to catch him off guard, which almost nothing did anymore. The whiskey left his hand before he could close his grip around it. "Oh, no. I'm so sorry, sir." Her hand flew up before she had even seen who she'd hit. Then she looked up, light brown eyes, full and shining. The same face he had watched through the glass, the same fear, the same dignity, the same stubborn refusal to let a single tear fall in front of anyone. The girl from the garden, standing in front of him, apologizing to him. She was already looking away before she could read whatever had crossed his face. But Nolan saw hers, the color that had risen in her cheeks, the way her lips pressed together, just once, hard, as if she was holding something in that had been trying to come out all evening. Her eyes dropped before she could let them say anything more. Then she was gone, past him, fast, toward the front terrace, not walking, almost running. Something moved in Nolan's chest that had not moved in 5 years. He looked down at his shirt. He left the glass on the nearest tray, and he followed her. The party dulled behind the glass, reduced to music, silhouettes, and light moving across expensive faces. She was standing at the far end with her back to him, both hands on the stone railing, breathing the way people breathe when they are trying very hard not to cry. Nolan did not speak right away. He let his footsteps carry across the stone first, so she would hear him coming. When he was close enough, his voice came out low. Not soft, but careful, the way a man speaks when he knows one wrong word could make someone disappear behind herself. "Bad night?" She made a sound that almost became a laugh and lost its courage halfway there. She tried for a smile, the way someone might reach for a coat in the dark and find the wrong sleeve. The back of her hand went to her cheek and dragged across it once. That was when he saw her wrist clearly. A bruise had come up under the skin there, fresh and darkening. The kind of bruise a hand leaves when it has held on too tightly for too long. 4 small ovals on the inside of the bone, a 5th above them. His gaze stayed on it longer than politeness allowed. Then she turned her face up to him, and this close, in the cold light of the terrace, the same look from the ballroom hit him harder than it had any right to. Something he had not been ready for. Not tonight. Her gaze fell to the whiskey stain on his shirt, and her lips parted around an apology she had already given. "I'm so sorry, I can fix the shirt." Her voice held for 1 second, then thinned. "That may be the only thing I can fix tonight." A faint scent kept reaching him, musk under jasmine, rising warm from her hair. And inside him, quietly, something was shifting that had been still for a very long time. His own voice came out lower than he meant it to. "There is nothing in life that can't be handled. Except death. Sometimes your method simply stops working." She drew in a breath, her gaze drifting back through the glass, toward the chandeliers, the violins, the careful crowd waiting for a ceremony they thought belonged to her. "And what's supposed to stop any of it tonight?" She was not really asking him. Nolan leaned in close. His mouth was near her ear now, and the next words went only between the two of them, barely louder than breath. "There is always another option." She turned her head, and his face was a hand's width from hers. Close enough for him to see the exact second she realized he was not offering comfort. He was offering danger, shaped like a door. Her lips parted, and her answer came almost in a whisper. "Not tonight, there isn't." It came out flat, closer to a verdict than a plea. Then a voice cut across the terrace. "Mara!" Richard Whitmore was in the doorway, his voice already carrying before either of them could turn. "Enough! The ceremony is starting. You do not disappear from your own engagement and make guests wonder where you are." Mara's shoulders were already pulling in a fraction. Her hand was moving toward her wrist again, the old instinct returning before she could stop it. Richard took 1 step forward. "Come here." Until that moment, Nolan had been standing in the shadow of the terrace wall, just outside Richard's line of sight. He let the silence hold for 1 moment longer than was comfortable, then stepped forward into the light. Richard's gaze went first to the black of the jacket, then to the face. Dark hair pushed back, a few days of stubble touched with the faintest silver, deep-set eyes that did not blink. The change was immediate. The hard edges of Richard's voice were polished off in half a second, and a respectful smile slid onto his mouth as if it had been waiting backstage. "Mr. Campbell, I didn't realize you were out here." Nolan's gaze stayed on Richard's face. "You should call your daughter more gently, Whitmore. Your voice carries." Richard's smile froze a half-second too long before it found its footing again. "A father worries. These evenings can overwhelm young women." Nolan let his gaze drop slowly to Mara's wrist. He kept it there long enough for Richard to follow it down, then brought it back up. Worry rarely leaves marks. The terrace was going quiet, in a way the music behind the glass could not reach. Richard's respectful expression did not crack, but something fast and dark was moving behind his eyes and vanished before most men would have caught it. Most men were not Nolan Campbell. Mara had not taken a full breath. She turned her face up to Nolan 1 more time, the shock catching her before her voice did. "Mr. Campbell, I'm sorry. I didn't realize it was you." Her gaze fell again to his ruined shirt. She pressed the inside of her cheek hard against her tongue, gathering whatever was left of her composure into something she could carry back inside. Nolan's next words stayed low enough for only her. "Do not mistake tonight for the end of your choices." Her gaze lifted, just for a second, and whatever she found in his face she carried with her when she turned away. She crossed the stone to her father. Richard's hand settled at the small of her back the way ownership rests on a thing it has paid for, and they stepped through the doorway together. He was watching her go, the line of her shoulders, the gown that was not trying to win the room, the small bruise on her wrist she kept pressed against her hip until she reached the ballroom. The name moved across his lips, low enough that no one but the cold stone of the terrace heard it. Mara Whitmore. So, this was you all along. Inside, the violins were lifting into the opening notes of a ceremony no one in that house had earned. Nolan was still watching her, Mara crossing the ballroom toward the man who was about to put a ring on the same wrist someone else had bruised. Then he set down his glass and made a decision he had not made in 5 years. Mara had not moved, but the room had. Guests were easing back, every face arranged into polite warmth. Some of the women were smiling at her as if she were lucky. She knew how to read rooms like this. Tonight, this one had decided she was happy. Her father was standing at her right shoulder, his smile broad enough for the cameras and steady enough for the partners. It was the smile of work being finished. He wasn't looking at his daughter. He was watching the line of guests holding raised glasses and counting which ones mattered. Mara lowered her gaze before any of it could reach her face. Her fingers were pressing quietly together at her side, a small private grip that did nothing for anyone else and everything for her. Behind the arch, the terrace doors opened, and Preston walked in, adjusting his tie. Mara saw the crooked collar before she saw his face, then the looseness in his shoulders, then the bright, unfocused warmth in his eyes, a man trying to look sober for an audience that had already paid for the show. Her fiancé Preston took his place beside her, with the lazy assurance of a man arriving late to his own engagement and expecting the room to forgive him for being interesting. When their shoulders almost touched, he leaned in close enough that only she would catch the words. "Smile, Vanilla. Every woman in this room is watching you get what they wanted. Don't embarrass yourself by looking disappointed." Whiskey on his breath. Underneath it, something sweeter and wrong. A perfume that wasn't hers, warmed by skin that wasn't hers either. A slow heat climbed up the inside of Mara's throat. She made herself breathe through it. She kept her face forward. Her fingers folded tighter into themselves until the bones in her hand ached. The pain was something she had earned and could feel and could keep. Preston pulled the small velvet box from his pocket. Grant Atkins moved to the center of the floor, raising his glass. "To family," he began. "To legacy. To the union that makes both of ours stronger." Murmurs of approval, glasses lifted. Then her father's voice came in just behind Grant's, smooth and rehearsed. "To our children," he said, "and to the union that will open the right doors for both families." Doors. The only thing her father had ever truly wanted. Her body moved before her mind did. Years of practice. The same body that knew how to stand still in a doorway when her father was on the phone, that knew how to keep its face quiet during dinners with men twice her age. She turned a quarter of an inch. Her father's smile had not changed. His gaze had. The warning was small and meant for her alone. "Don't fail me." She raised her hand. A faint tremor moved through her fingers before she could lock them in place. 25 years of agreeing, and her body had finally chosen tonight to refuse. Preston's mouth curved. His voice came soft, almost flirtatious, but only she was close enough to hear it. "Nervous?" He took the ring from the box. The diamond caught the chandelier light and threw small, sharp pieces of it across the white of his cuff. "Careful. People might think you're not grateful." He brought the ring toward her finger slowly enough to enjoy himself, close enough for Mara to feel the cold of the metal in the air just before it touched her skin. Then a voice cut through the ballroom from the far end of the floor. "Lower your hand." The violin failed first, one clean note breaking and dying under the bow. The second instrument was already losing its line. The whole room was sucking in a breath as a single body. Preston's hand was still in the air, the ring still pinched between his fingers, and it was not coming down. For a moment, Mara did not understand why her finger was still bare. Then she lowered her hand, slowly, deliberately. The way a woman lowers a glass she has decided she will not drink from. Every face in the room had turned. At the threshold of the open marble floor stood Nolan Campbell. He had not raised his voice. He never had to. Preston recovered first, the way he always did, with a laugh that was more reflex than confidence. "Uncle Nolan, a little dramatic even for you." Nolan didn't look at him. He walked into the room. The crowd shifted before he reached them. A woman near the arch stepped back with her glass pressed against her chest. Two men by Grant fell silent mid-sentence. A waiter lowered his tray without ever looking down at it. The two security men who had been standing quietly at the doors did not look at Grant Atkins for instructions. They looked at Nolan. That was the moment the room understood whose house this was. Nolan stopped a few feet from Preston, and the ring still trapped in his fingers. "Lower your hand, Preston." Preston's smile thinned. His hand stayed up another second, then dropped. Too late to be defiance, too fast to be anything else. Grant moved before her father did, smooth and careful. "Nolan, this is family business." Nolan turned a quarter of an inch toward him. "This is Campbell property, Campbell security, Campbell approval. And every agreement in this room depends on it." His voice dropped by a single degree. "I withdraw it." Somewhere in the back of the crowd, a glass was set down too hard against a tray. The sound broke through the silence like a coin into still water. His eyes moved across the room, settling. "This engagement will not happen." Her father moved at last, carefully. "Mr. Campbell, surely there has been some misunderstanding. The young people—" "I am not discussing the young people, Whitmore." Nolan's gaze did not move from his face. "I am discussing what I will allow under my roof." The ballroom held its breath. Mara stood between her father and the man who had just stopped her engagement, and the place on her finger where the ring should have been sat suddenly cold and aware of itself. Preston's pride caught up with his face before his sense did. "This is insane. You can't just walk in and decide—" Nolan looked at him. Preston's mouth stayed half open, but his body understood the warning before his pride did. Grant's expression hardened. Her father glanced once toward Grant, once toward Mara, calculating whether this disaster could still be folded into something useful. Nolan turned toward the guests. "Our evening is finished." No one moved. His voice came down by a single degree. "Now." The house answered him. Security stepped toward the doors. Staff moved without confusion. The violinist lowered his bow. The flowers still hung from the arch, and the ring still sat in Preston's hand. But the engagement was over, and the room knew it. Grant closed the distance to Nolan, voice low. "What are you doing? You've humiliated us in front of everyone." Nolan looked at him without hurry. "If you're worried about your reputation, Grant, start with Preston." Grant's mouth shut. Her father had not moved at all. He was watching Nolan now, uncertain whether what he was seeing was disaster, protection, or some more dangerous form of opportunity. Nolan turned from Grant and walked toward her. His pace stayed exactly where he wanted it, measured, deliberate. Her father lifted one hand a fraction. Nolan's gaze flicked once in his direction. Her father's hand lowered. When Nolan reached her, he stopped close enough that she could hear him breathe. After her father's grip on her wrist outside, after Preston's mouth near her ear, after a whole evening of being guided and positioned and corrected and arranged like furniture for someone else's room, this man kept his hands to himself. His gaze dropped to her wrist. The bruise had darkened in the chandelier light. Mara covered it with her other hand before she could decide to. Nolan had already seen. His voice came down to her, low enough that the closest guests would not catch the words. "Come with me, Mara." "Upstairs." A small heat was rising along the back of Mara's neck. "Why?" Nolan didn't fill the silence the way most men would have. "Because if you stay in this room, they will start explaining your life again." For a second, keeping her face steady was harder than breathing. Mara's gaze moved past him. to her father, to Grant, to Preston, who was still watching with a mouth pressed into a line that had nothing left of charm in it. And upstairs? Nolan stepped one half step aside, leaving the path to the staircase open behind him. Upstairs. You get to answer before anyone decides for you. Behind him, Preston's voice cracked through the room. Uncle Nolan, what the hell is this? Nolan didn't turn. Mara looked at the staircase, then at her father. The expression that meant, fix this, do it now, do it without making me ask twice. Then at Preston, his charm gone, his mouth open and useless. Then at Grant, watching her like a man recalculating a contract. The whole room was waiting for her to become manageable again. Mara did not feel brave. She only understood that if she stayed in that room, the next version of her life would be written before she opened her mouth, so she walked toward the stairs. Nolan opened the door and she followed him in. Mara stayed near the door. Her eyes went to the screens first, 3 of them above the desk, cycling through black and white feeds of the property. Front gate, marble corridor, east entrance, the kind of room that watched everything and gave nothing back. A fireplace breathed low embers against one wall. The desk by the window held papers arranged in precise columns, a laptop, 2 smaller screens. Everything in its place, everything accounted for. Nolan was at the window, his back to her, hands in his pockets. He was watching the last of the cars roll out through his gate. He did not move when she came in. The quiet pressed against her until her own voice sounded too small for the room. Mr. Campbell? His shoulders shifted, but his face stayed turned to the glass. Why did you stop the engagement? He stood as he had been, hands in his pockets, his gaze on the gate beyond. For a long moment he gave her nothing but the sound of his own slow breath. Then his voice came back over his shoulder, low and steady. Because that ring was about to land on a wrist that already had a bruise on it. Mara's fingers found her own wrist before she could decide to. She covered the mark with her other hand. But Preston is your nephew. The edge in her voice surprised her on the way out, but she kept going. For a moment I thought you did this because you saw I was upset. But you don't strike me as a man who concerns himself with something like that. Then he turned, slowly, the way a man turns when he has already decided what he is going to do next. He walked toward her without hurry, hands still in his pockets, and stopped 3 steps away. The whiskey stain on his shirt was still there. He had not changed. If I hadn't stopped it, who would have? She lowered her gaze. The honest answer was already in her chest before her mouth could decide to give it. No one. His voice dropped quieter. Mara, in this world, who do you trust? She pressed her lips together. The answer took a moment to come out, and when it did, it came out small. I'm not sure I trust anyone. Nolan held her eyes. Good. A half step closer. His voice came down between them, low and certain. Because in this world, the only person you should truly trust is yourself. She was holding his gaze a second longer than was safe and let it go before he could see how far inside her the sentence had gone. Her voice came back quieter, but the edge in it was new. Then read this. Did you save me tonight, Mr. Campbell? Or did you just move me to another room where men decide for me a little quieter? His expression did not change, but something passed behind his eyes that was harder to name than the rest of him. Before he could answer, a fist landed against the door, heavy, once, then twice. Mara's shoulders were already pulling in before she could stop them. Preston's voice came through the wood, slurred at the edges. Uncle Nolan, open the door. Nolan did not move. His gaze stayed on Mara, as if the noise outside the room belonged to a different room entirely. The voice came again, lower now, uglier. She was my fiancée, 10 minutes ago. His voice carried through the door without effort. She was never yours. A short silence on the other side, then a brittle laugh that had nothing left of charm in it. You think taking her upstairs makes you noble? The heat was climbing up the back of Mara's neck. Tomorrow's headline written through a closed door by a man who could not hold a glass straight. Nolan's chin lifted once toward the corridor. Michael. Footsteps were already moving outside, quiet and quick. Preston's voice rose one final time. Her father will bring her back down. He's already deciding where to put her tomorrow. Then the footsteps reached him. A brief scuffle. A door at the far end of the corridor opening and closing. The sounds thinned out and disappeared. Mara did not realize she had moved until she was at the surveillance screen. The rotation cycled, front gate, marble corridor, east entrance. Her father was crossing it. Not toward the stairs, toward the door. Grant Atkins beside him, both of them moving toward Grant's car the way men move when they have already started repairing a deal between themselves. Her father did not look back at the house. Mara stood there until the rotation reached the next feed and lost them. Her father had not come for her. The thought arrived with a quietness that hurt more than tears would have. Not surprise. She understood now that some part of her had known since the terrace, since he had pressed his hand to the small of her back and guided her toward the ceremony like something he had already paid for. She had known. She had simply not been ready to look at it directly until now. Nolan was watching her. He did not narrate what she had just seen. He let her have the silence she needed to absorb it. When her voice came back, it came back small and very clean. He left. Nolan's answer came without wait. Yes. With Grant. A single nod, barely there. She turned away from the screen, because looking at it any longer was going to cost her something she could not yet afford to spend. Nolan moved to his desk. He shrugged off his jacket and laid it across the back of the chair, rolling his sleeves to his elbows, unhurried, automatic, a man settling into his own space. That was when Mara saw it, the inside of his left forearm, a scar, pale and long-heeled, running from below the elbow toward the wrist. Not a small thing, the kind that comes from heat close enough to leave a permanent memory in the skin. Her eyes stayed on it a second longer than she meant them to. Nolan did not notice, or if he noticed, he did not show it. He was already turning back toward her, and his gaze returned to her face as if nothing in the room had changed. She looked away before he could catch the question she had not asked. What happened to you? She tucked it somewhere quiet and did not take it out again. His voice came quieter than before. I'm going to host you here for a while, Mara, until this settles. She blinked. Mr. Campbell, that puts me in a more difficult position, and it puts you in one as well. His voice did not shift. My position is not the one at risk. He let the silence carry for one heartbeat before he gave her the rest. I will tell people we are engaged. The room contracted around the word. Mara felt herself repeat it inside her mouth before she let it out, as if testing whether it would stay. Engaged. Only to protect you. From your father. From Preston. His voice stayed even. It silences both of them. It may even please your father. From what I have seen tonight, the only thing he has ever truly wanted was to be inside the room when Campbell decisions were being made. Tomorrow he will believe he has finally been let in. A tight, unhappy smile pulled at her mouth. And my choice in any of this? 2 engagements in one night, Mr. Campbell. Neither of them asked of me. My name has been decided for me twice in the same evening. Nolan stepped one half step closer, and the space between them was changing shape. She caught the scent of him then, something clean and dark beneath the rain still clinging to his shoulders. Vetiver. Bergamot. And his eyes, this close, she had not been ready for. Mossy green. Steady. Looking at her the way a man looks at someone he has already decided to remember. His voice came down between them. Not soft. Not asking. I am not making this decision for you, Mara. I am offering to make a decision with you. One that protects you. She was holding his eyes longer than she had meant to. You can walk out of this house the moment you want to, but the moment you do, I cannot protect you anymore. The room, his house, his rules, should have felt like another cage. It did not. That was the part that frightened her most. Some quiet, exhausted thing inside her had already begun to read this room as safe ground. She did not yet know what that would cost her. She only knew that this man had let her stand at the surveillance screen in silence instead of narrating her grief back to her, and that the scar on his forearm was still sitting somewhere in the back of her mind where she had put it. Can I leave whenever I want? His gaze did not leave hers. That door isn't locked, Mara. He gave her a moment with that, then went on. Stay a few weeks, let the noise settle, let everyone get used to the idea, and then you go back to your life. Mara moved toward the door. Her hand reached for the handle, then stopped. She turned back. "Mr. Campbell." She let his name settle in the room before she gave him hers. "I will stay." A pause held between them. "But not as your fiancé, as your guest, until I decide." Something moved across his face that was harder to name than the rest of him. He held her eyes through it, and when he answered, his voice was perfectly calm. "By tomorrow morning, the news of our engagement will be on every front page in this country." He let her hear it land. "By the time you decide, Mara, the world will already have decided you are mine." She had spent a whole evening letting men say things about her without correcting them. She looked at him directly and let her voice come back the way it had on the terrace, small but exact. "Then the world will have to wait for me to correct it." Nolan said nothing. Something quiet was lighting at the back of his eyes, surprise that had not yet decided whether to become respect. She turned to leave, and that was when she saw it. On the corner of his desk, half turned away from the room, a small silver frame. Inside it, a blonde woman caught mid-laugh, sun caught in her hair, looking back at whoever had been holding the camera as if there had been nothing else worth looking at on that particular afternoon. Mara's hand was still on the door handle, and she could feel the seconds passing through it. Who is she? And why, if there has ever been a woman who looked at Nolan Campbell like that, did he choose me tonight instead of her? She did not ask. She walked out, and she kept her face from changing until the door was closed between them. Edith was already in the corridor. "This way, Miss Whitmore," the older woman said quietly, and led her down the hall without waiting for an answer. The guest suite was larger than anything Mara had slept in before. She stood in the center of it for a moment after Edith closed the door, just letting the quiet settle around her. Through the tall windows, the dark line of Puget Sound stretched across the far edge of the garden, the city's lights scattered along the distant shore like something that had decided to stay. She sat on the edge of the bed, still in the engagement gown. Her phone was on the bedside table. The screen had been lighting up since she left the ballroom. She could feel it from here without looking. She reached for it. 12 missed calls, 8 messages, all from her father. The screen cycled past the first lines before she could stop it. "Call me. Do not make this worse. You will come home before morning." Her thumb hovered. For half a second her hand started moving the way it had moved 1,000 times before, to answer him, to fix it, to make sure he was not angry tomorrow. She turned the phone face down on the table. Her hand did not shake. That, somehow, was the part that frightened her most. She did not remember deciding to sleep. She only remembered the ceiling being the wrong shape when she opened her eyes again, and the clock reading 3:14, and the particular silence of a house that was not hers. She stood, crossed to the bathroom, let the gown slide to the marble, and turned the shower on hot. The water had barely run the cold out when the alarm went off. Low, repeating, building. Mara's breath snagged. She killed the water, pulled the robe from the hook, wrapped it tight, and stepped out onto the bedroom floor barefoot. In the corridor, footsteps were moving fast. This was a mistake. The thought arrived clean and cold. Staying here was a mistake. She opened the door. At the far end of the corridor, at the head of the staircase, Nolan was already there. White shirt, sleeves pushed to his elbows, no jacket, no tie. The version of him that existed after the careful exterior had been set aside for the night. He was speaking to Michael in a low, quick voice. Then he looked up. His eyes found her face first. Then they moved. Taking in the wet hair against her collarbones, the robe pulled tight, the bare feet on cold marble, and came back to her face. Quickly, as if the rest had not been a permission he intended to give himself. His voice carried down the corridor, steady. "False alarm. Go back inside." Mara did not move for a second. Then she stepped back and closed the door. 5 minutes later, a knock. She opened it. Nolan was standing in the corridor, one hand resting on the doorframe. His gaze moved over her once, the wet hair, the robe, the bare feet, and came back to her face. The corner of his mouth did something small. "Edith left you with nothing to wear?" Mara folded her arms across her chest, holding the robe closer. "It's all right. I'll manage." His eyes, stayed on hers. That restraint, the deliberate distance he was keeping, the hands that remained exactly where they were, unsettled her more than closeness would have. She could feel her own pulse moving into her throat. The robe felt thinner than it had a moment ago. She was too aware of the wet hair at her collarbones, the cold marble under her feet, the space between them that had stopped being only physical distance. Edith. The name carried down the corridor without effort. Edith appeared at the corner, a small ribboned bag already in her hand. She held it out without ceremony. Nolan's eyes came back to Mara's. His voice dropped quieter than the look. "Good night, Mara." He moved off down the corridor, the broad set of his shoulders, the unhurried weight of his walk, the way the house seemed to make room for him without being asked. Mara made herself speak before her voice could fail. "Good night, Edith." Edith turned away. Mara stopped her. "Edith." The older woman turned back. Mara stood with the bag of clothes still in her hand, the door open behind her. Mr. Campbell's study, the photograph on his desk, the blonde woman. Something moved in Edith's face. Not surprise. Recognition, with something colder behind it that she did not allow forward. "Who is she?" Edith's reply came short and quiet. "Mrs. Campbell, his late wife." Mara did not breathe for a second. Edith held her eyes. "Don't ask him about her tonight." Then she walked away. Mara stepped back inside and let the door fall shut behind her. The bag of clothes was still in her hand. She set it on the bed without looking at it. She went to the window. Below the gardens, 2 security men were walking the perimeter. The grounds were quiet. The gate at the end of the long drive stood closed. Then she saw him. Preston. He was standing outside the gate, leaning against the hood of his car. Not leaving. Not moving. Just standing there in the cold with his hands in his pockets, staring up at the house the way a man stares at something he has decided he is not finished with. Mara's hand pressed against the glass. Then his phone lit up. He looked at the screen. Something shifted in his posture, a straightening, almost reluctant, the way a man moves when a call he has been expecting finally comes. He brought it to his ear. From where Mara stood, she could not hear a word. But she could see his face. Whatever the voice on the other end was saying, it was not comfort. Preston's expression moved through something. Impatience, then attention, then a slow, careful settling. The particular look of a man who has just been handed a reason to stay dangerous. He said something short into the phone, nodded once, and did not look away from the house. Mara stepped back from the glass before he could look up and find her watching. She stood in the center of the room, the city quiet outside, the house quiet around her. The woman in the silver frame had a name, and the man on the phone outside her window had not come here tonight to apologize. The knock came before she was ready for the morning. Mara had been awake for some time already, lying in the unfamiliar quiet of the suite, watching the early light move across the ceiling in slow, pale shapes. But she had not been ready. There was a difference. She reached for the satin robe Edith had left, pulled it tight, and opened the door. Edith stood in the corridor, hands folded, her expression carrying the particular composure of a woman who had delivered difficult news enough times to have smoothed all the edges off it. "Miss Whitmore? Mr. Campbell is waiting for you downstairs, in the living room, now." Mara glanced past her toward the window at the end of the hall, and what she saw there made her cross to it before she had decided to move. Below, at the iron gate, a crowd had gathered. Cameras. Microphones. A news van at the edge of the drive. People pressing toward the gate the way people press towards something they have decided they own a piece of. "Oh no." The words came out small, almost a murmur. This quickly. She dressed without thinking much about what she was putting on. It was only on the stairs, halfway down, that she registered she was still wearing the champagne silk from the night before, the engagement gown, the one she had slept around the edges of and never quite taken off. There was nothing to be done about it now. She kept walking. The living room was quiet in the way large rooms are quiet when only one person is standing in them. Nolan had his back to the door. He was standing at the far end of the room with his hands in his pockets, facing the tall windows, watching the last of the morning fog burn off the water below the gardens. He did not turn when she entered. He gave her the room instead. Let her come to it, find her footing in it. Mara stopped a few feet inside the doorway. "Mr. Campbell?" He turned, and for a moment, no longer than a breath, no shorter than something she would remember, his eyes moved over her. The dress, the bare shoulders, the gown that had been someone else's idea of what she should wear last night, still on her body the following morning. His expression did not change, but he had seen. "Have you decided, Mara?" His voice was the same as it had been at midnight, low, unhurried, treating the question as if it had a reasonable answer no matter which direction she chose. Mara took one slow breath. Outside, someone was speaking into a camera. She could hear the murmur of it through the glass. "Mr. Campbell," she kept her voice even, "even if we go through with this, even if you announce the engagement, how long do you intend to protect me, and why?" Her chin lifted a fraction. "You must be getting something from this. That's how your world works. Decisions like this don't come without something in return." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. The private kind. The kind that meant he had already accounted for the question and found it accurate. "You're a smart woman, Mara." He let that settle before he turned it around. "You went to Stanford. Business. You lived away from your family for 4 years. He held her gaze. "I read the rest." Something shifted in her chest. He had looked into her, not last night, before that or this morning or somewhere in the hours between. The question was how long he had been looking. His gaze stayed steady on hers. "You could have built your own life. Why didn't you?" She held his eyes for a moment longer than was comfortable. "Answer mine first," she said, "and I'll answer yours." Something in him approved of that. The same quiet approval she had seen in his study the night before, when she had told him she trusted no one. Recognition without warmth, the acknowledgement of a person who had learned the same thing a different way. He nodded once, and gave her what she had asked for. Grant had married his sister, he told her. She died of cancer years ago. Grant stayed. The way people stay when leaving would require effort no one has asked them to make. Preston had inherited the worst of his father and none of the few qualities that made the man functional. They remained at Campbell Industries because of blood, and blood was the one currency he had not yet found a replacement for. Her father's motivation, he understood. Richard Whitmore had always wanted proximity to the Campbell name more than he had ever wanted anything for his daughter. That much had been legible from across a ballroom. But Grant's urgency, the particular quality of his insistence about the engagement, the speed of it, the pressure he had put on Preston, that was something else. Something Nolan did not yet have a shape for. "But none of that explains why you stopped it," Mara said. He moved. Not quickly. Nolan Campbell never did anything quickly that he could choose to do slowly. A few steps toward her, hands still in his pockets, until he was close enough that she had to make a conscious decision about where to look. She looked at his face. His eyes were the same dark, steady green they had been the night before. And looking into them now, in the full quiet of the morning, she understood why she kept finding reasons to look away. It was not that they were cold. It was that they were too still. The way deep water is still. If I look any longer, she thought, and stopped it there because she already knew where it was going. "I saw you in the garden." His voice came down between them, quiet. "The way you were standing, the way you kept your face." Mara held very still. He had not heard her. He had seen her. There was a difference, and she felt it land somewhere under her ribs. The words were simple. They were also the only true answer to the question, and they both knew it. A knock at the living room door. Michael, low-voiced and efficient, to say that the journalists had been admitted to the outer grounds and were asking for a statement. She had not yet given him her answer, the one he had asked for in exchange for his. She was aware of that the whole way down the hall, a small, unresolved thing, moving alongside everything else. The entrance hall was brighter than the living room. The double doors stood open, and beyond them the grey Seattle morning pressed in. cameras and voices, and the particular quality of attention that gathered when Nolan Campbell's name was on a story. Mara walked toward the light. She was aware of Nolan beside her, aware of him slightly behind her as she stepped out through the open door, and the morning came at her in full. The camera shutters, the voices lifting, the cold air against her bare shoulders, and the champagne silk that had never been meant for this. The questions came fast, several at once, overlapping at the edges. "Mr. Campbell, why did you stop your nephew's engagement? Is it true Miss Whitmore spent the night in your home? Do you have an objection to Miss Whitmore joining the family?" Nolan raised one hand. The crowd went quiet. Mara was watching it happen. The way sound simply left the air when he decided it should. The cameras were still running, the people were still there, but the voices were not, and every face in that garden had turned toward him with the particular attention people give to men who have never needed to ask for it. His voice carried across the grounds without effort, unhurried, the temperature of stone. "Miss Whitmore and my nephew Preston Atkins have no relationship. The engagement between them was a misunderstanding that has been corrected." Whispers moved through the group, quick and low, the way water moves when something is dropped into it. "I would like to announce my engagement to Miss Whitmore." The flashes came all at once. The questions rose back up, louder now, sharper, coming from every direction. Mara kept her face forward. She kept her expression in the register she had spent years calibrating, composed, present, giving nothing away. She was aware of her own heartbeat. She was aware of the cold. She was aware, in the periphery of her vision, of Nolan's right hand at his side, partially concealed by the line of his jacket. It was trembling, not in a way that the cameras would catch, not in a way that the journalists busy with their next questions would notice, but she noticed, because she had spent 25 years watching her own hands do exactly that, pressing them flat against her skirt, closing them around pens and glass stems and the backs of chairs, willing the trembling to stop before anyone could see what it meant. She did not look at him. She shifted her hand the few inches between them and closed her fingers around his, without looking, without ceremony, the way you cover something that should not be visible to the people who are watching. His hand went still under hers. He turned to look at her. She felt it before she saw it, the weight of his gaze shifting from the crowd to her face. When she met his eyes, there was something there she had not seen in them before. Not surprise exactly, something that had not yet decided what it was. She looked back at him, and she did not try to arrange her expression into anything particular. Whatever was on her face, warmth, she supposed, something that lived near it, she let it stay. They held each other's gaze for a moment that the cameras would later describe as tender. His voice came short and final, directed at the crowd without turning back to them. "No further questions." His hand closed around hers and he turned through the open door, drawing her with him, and the door closed behind them. The entrance hall was dim after the brightness outside. The sound of the journalists fell away behind the glass. Nolan released her hand and stood very still in the center of the hallway. He was trying not to show it, but she could see it, his breathing slightly faster than it should be, something in the careful set of his jaw that had not been there in the living room. He took one step toward the corridor. His weight shifted wrong. A barely perceptible stagger, there and gone in less than a second, the kind a person covers with a forward movement if they are practiced at it. Mara's hand went to his arm before she had decided to reach for it. "Mr. Campbell." Her voice came out quiet, not alarmed. "Are you all right?" "No problem." His voice was steady, the same as always. He moved toward the study. She followed. He was standing at his desk when she came through the door. Not sitting, not pacing, just standing with one hand resting on the surface of it. His breathing had evened. His back was to her. He turned. "You didn't give me an answer." His voice had settled back into its usual register. "Out there, and in the living room, you never said. I assumed your agreement, but I shouldn't have assumed." Mara crossed the room toward him. She stopped close enough that he would have to look at her to look away, and she held his gaze with the same steadiness she had used on the step outside. No performance in it, just the thing itself. Several seconds passed between them. "I kept going back to my father," she said. Her voice was even, but something under it was not, and she did not try to smooth that over. I always wanted his approval, not because I didn't know better. I knew better. But knowing something and being able to stop wanting the opposite are not the same thing. Her eyes stayed on his. I wanted to prove to myself that he saw me. Not a name, not a contract, not a useful connection. Me. I wanted to matter to him in a way that wasn't conditional on what I could be used for. She stopped. The silence in the room was complete. And instead, I became exactly that. Her voice did not break, but it came close enough that she could feel the edge of it. In his world, in the world around him, useful, tradable, the kind of woman a man could put in a room and decide the value of. Her eyes held his without flinching. Your world, Mr. Campbell, is it different? Does being capable matter here? Does being myself matter? Or am I only ever going to be someone's leverage? She felt the tears before she had given them permission. A pressure behind her eyes she had been holding back since the night before, since the garden, since her father walked out through the east entrance without looking back at the house. That's all I've ever been to anyone. Her voice dropped to something very small and very clean. Including you, isn't it? Nolan was looking at her the way he looked at things he intended to understand completely before he acted on them. He reached forward. 2 fingers, gentle and deliberate, found her chin and lifted it, giving her somewhere to look so that what he said next would reach her properly. A single tear had moved down her cheek. He caught it with his thumb, a slow and careful motion, and did not pull his hand away immediately. You are more to me than leverage, Mara. His voice was low, stripped of everything unnecessary. I hope, in time, you'll find a way to believe that. Mara took 1 step back, not away from him, just back enough to breathe, to let the air rearrange itself around her. She did not know why this man made her feel safe, why something in his eyes reminded her of herself, not the self she performed in rooms full of her father's partners, but something older and quieter, something she had almost stopped believing was still there. She did not know why the pull she felt toward him was both the most irrational and the most honest thing she had experienced in years. She breathed in slowly. Can I go out for a while? Her voice had returned to its usual shape. I have things I need to attend to today. The corner of his mouth shifted, that small private movement she was beginning to recognize. I told you, the doors aren't locked. Something in his manner resettled, the way a man resettles when he is putting a harder expression back on. I'll expect you at dinner, 7:30. Mara gave him a small nod and turned toward the door. She had her hand on the frame when his voice came from behind her, quiet and with the particular quality of something that had been held a long time before being set down. Thank you, Mara. His voice dropped lower still. For what you did out there, with your hand. She kept walking. She kept her face from changing until the corridor had closed around her and the study was behind her and the house was quiet in every direction. Only there, standing alone in the upper hallway, back against the cool plaster of the wall, did she let out the breath she had been holding since she first stepped into that grey Seattle morning and felt the cold come in. She had not known, reaching for his hand, what she was doing. She was beginning to think she might be lying to herself about that. The morning air hit her before she had fully cleared the door. Mara stepped out onto the front steps of the Campbell house, still wearing the champagne silk. The engagement gown, last night's dress, the one she had not had a chance to change out of. At the bottom of the steps, a black car sat at the curb. Before she had taken 2 steps down, the driver's door opened. A man she didn't recognize came around to the passenger side and opened the rear door without being asked. Practiced quiet, the kind of movement that has been done enough times to require no thought. Mara stopped on the 3rd step. Mr. Campbell sent you. It was not a question. The driver inclined his head in a way that confirmed it without requiring him to defend it. George, Miss Whitmore, Mr. Campbell asked that I stay with you today, wherever you need to go. She studied him for a moment. He had the kind of face that had been weather-worn into something permanent. Steady, watchful, built for patience. So he can know where I am at every moment. George's expression did not shift. There was something practiced in its steadiness, the kind of steadiness that had learned to absorb pointed questions without returning them. So your morning is comfortable, Miss Whitmore, and safe. Mara looked at the open door. She looked at George. She thought of the gate at the end of the drive, and the journalists who had been there an hour ago, and the way her name had moved through that crowd this morning, the way a stone moves through still water, fast, and leaving rings long after. Part of her wanted to tell him she'd take her own car. The other part, the part she was less willing to examine, was already descending the last steps. She got into the car. She stopped at her apartment long enough to change and pack a bag. 20 minutes later, she was back in the car, heading toward the financial district. The Whitmore Group building rose 14 stories above the financial district, steel and glass, nothing wasted on aesthetic. Mara had walked through its lobby more than 1,000 times. She had her badge out before the door opened. The lobby guard's eyes came up when she walked in, then came back down to his desk. Mara kept walking. Her office was on the 7th floor, middle of the building, the kind of location that said useful but not essential. She had never minded that. The middle of the building meant nobody stopped to look through your window. She was halfway to her desk when her father appeared in the corridor. He must have been watching for the elevator. His expression carried the careful composition of a man who had had several hours to decide how to approach something and had settled on a version of himself that reads as reasonable. "Mara." His voice was measured. "I've been trying to reach you." "I know." She kept walking. He fell into step beside her, and the fact that he had to follow her down the corridor rather than her stopping and waiting for him, as she would have done yesterday, as she had done 1,000 times before, registered in some small muscle along his jaw. "Is it true?" He was not asking. "The Campbell engagement. Every outlet in the city has it." "Yes." She opened her office door. "It's true." Richard followed her in. She set her bag on the desk and pulled her laptop toward her. Behind her, she heard him close the door, a sound she knew, the sound he made when a conversation was going to be private. "Mara." His voice had shifted into something warmer, which was, she had learned over 25 years, more dangerous than when it was cold. "Do you understand what this means? Not for the engagement, for the company. For us." She did not look up from her bag. His voice moved closer. Preston was an adequate match, adequate. But Nolan Campbell, "Mara, when you become Mrs. Campbell, the doors that open." There's that word again. Her voice came out even, but something underneath it had gone very still. She set her hands flat on the desk and turned to face him. "Doors. You used it at the ceremony too." "I remember." Richard paused. The warmth went out of his voice. "It's not a dirty word. A father wants opportunities for his daughter. You want opportunities for yourself." The evenness in her voice held, but she could feel it costing her. "That's different. And you know it's different, which is why you're standing here trying to make me believe it's the same thing." Something moved behind his eyes, not guilt exactly. The look of a man who had found his argument slightly less armored than he expected. "Mara, what I want and what's good for you are not at odds here. He doesn't know me." The words came before she had fully decided to say them. "Nolan Campbell doesn't know me. He's protecting me from a situation I didn't choose, for reasons that have nothing to do with loving me. And you are standing in my office, not asking if I'm all right, not asking what I need, not once asking what I want, telling me how to leverage it." The warmth drained out of Richard's voice. What replaced it was not cruelty. It was something more honest and somehow harder to bear. "When you are Mrs. Campbell," he said, "you will want for nothing, not money, not security, not position, everything you've ever needed. You are remarkable." The laugh that came out of her chest was not a happy one. It arrived on its own, sharp and short, the kind that comes when something finally becomes clear enough to be absurd. She picked up her bag and moved toward the door. "Truly, I have spent 25 years trying to matter to you, and I never once considered that mattering to you might look exactly like this." Her hand was on the door handle. "I don't want to call you father anymore." Her voice had gone very quiet. "Not today, maybe not for a while." She did not wait for him to answer. The corridor was bright and indifferent. She understood now what mattering to him actually looked like. She sat at her desk for a long time before she opened her laptop. She typed his name into the search bar. Nolan Campbell. The results filled the screen. He was not the kind of man whose name went unrecorded. She read through the business pages first: acquisitions, government contracts, a defense partnership with the Canadian Ministry, a second manufacturing facility in the UK. Photographs of the building she was currently sleeping in, taken from the water, the kind of image that made it look less like a home than a feature of the coastline. She kept scrolling. The story appeared 7 items down. A news archive, dated 5 years ago. Campbell Defense executive wife killed in vehicle explosion. Authorities investigating possible organized crime connection. Mara's finger came off the trackpad. Something went quiet in her chest. Not the good kind of quiet. She read it. She read it again, the way you read something the second time, not because you missed it the first time, but because your brain is still catching up to what your eyes already understood. Evelyn Campbell, 34. The explosion had occurred at the gate of the Campbell estate. The vehicle, a device. Investigators had found evidence pointing toward Roos. Mara stopped reading. She leaned back and let the information rearrange itself inside her. The scar, the inside of his left forearm, pale, long-heeled, the kind that comes from heat close enough to leave a permanent memory. She let herself look at it now. He had been there. Close enough to carry the mark of it, close enough that his body, 5 years later, still could not cross the gate where it had happened. This man is dangerous, she thought. Whatever is around him carries a cost. She sat with that. Evelyn Campbell had probably not thought she was in danger either. Not at first, not before whatever chain of events had led to a gate and a car and a device. That thought arrived and stayed. She also could not stop hearing his voice. Low, stripped of everything unnecessary. You are more to me than leverage, Mara. Could not stop seeing the 2 fingers that had lifted her chin. The thumb that had caught the tear before it went any further. She reached for her bag, closed the laptop, and stood up. George was at the curb when she came through the building's main doors. Mara got into the back seat. George waited. George. She looked out at the city. Can we stop on the way back? Of course, Miss Whitmore. I want to pick up a bottle of wine. Her eyes stayed on the city. Something good. I don't know what he drinks. She wasn't sure why she wanted to bring something. She only knew that arriving empty-handed felt wrong in a way she didn't entirely want to examine. George's eyes met hers briefly in the rearview mirror. Something moved in them. Not amusement exactly. Something quieter than that. I can help with that, he said, and pulled into traffic. The wine shop on 5th had exactly what she was looking for. A Willamette Valley Pinot Noir, 2019, the kind that didn't announce itself. George was waiting at the curb when she came out. The kitchen smelled like something slow-cooked and serious. Edith stood at the counter directing the evening's arrangements with the quiet precision of a woman who had run this household long enough to have opinions about where the bread basket went. Mara set the wine on the island and pulled off her jacket. When is Mr. Campbell coming down? Edith's hands paused over the linen napkins. Something crossed her face. Not quite surprise, not quite concern. The expression of a woman who knew the answer and had already decided how much of it to give. Mr. Campbell is in his study. Her voice came back to its usual register. He's been in there since this afternoon. Mara picked up the wine. Edith had already turned back to her work, her hands moving with the careful attention of someone who had closed a subject and intended it to stay closed. The corridor outside the study was quiet. The door was solid wood, closed, the line of light underneath it, the only evidence of life on the other side. Mara stood with her knuckles an inch from the panel. She knocked. Hold on. The voice came through the wood first, low, clipped, addressing someone who was not her. She pushed the door open. 3 screens above the desk were running simultaneously. Feeds she recognized from the property's security system, the gate, the east entrance, the garden, and beside them, images she didn't recognize. A warehouse floor, a loading dock, cameras she had no frame of reference for. Nolan was standing at the desk with his phone pressed to his ear, his jacket off, his sleeves rolled to his elbows. His eyes found her the moment she stepped through the door and stayed there. Not a glance, not a check, but a full hold, the kind of attention that made the air in a room rearrange itself. He kept talking. His voice dropped a degree. Not louder, the opposite. The particular drop that meant the person on the other end should start listening very carefully. I don't want rats in my operation. Each word landed with the finality of something being closed. Handle it. Tonight. The call ended. He set the phone down without looking at it. His gaze moved over her slowly. The skirt, the jacket, the way she was standing in his doorway, still holding a bottle of wine, with the studied composure of a woman who had decided not to be affected by the room she'd just walked into. His expression moved, brief, contained, but she caught it. You came. We had an agreement. She kept her voice even. I'm keeping it. He crossed from behind the desk, and the space between them shortened in a way that required her to make a decision about where to look. He stopped close enough that she was aware of his height, the particular stillness he carried when he was deciding something. His hand moved toward her waist. Not landing, hovering, the gesture of a man exercising restraint he did not particularly want to exercise. Then let's go down to dinner. She turned toward the door. He runs his company from here, she thought, the whole thing, from inside these walls. The dining room held the particular quality of rooms designed for many people when only 2 were using them. The chandelier was on low. The table had been set at one end, Nolan at the head, Mara at the corner to his right, close enough that the distance between them was social rather than formal. He saw the wine the moment they sat down. Something moved in his eyes, warm and amused at once, more than he intended to show. You brought wine. I don't go empty-handed where I'm a guest. She unfolded her napkin and placed it in her lap. His eyes stayed on her for a moment before he reached for the bottle. You're thoughtful, Mara. She smiled, the small, practiced version, the one that gave nothing away, and picked up her fork. He was quiet while he poured, and she was beginning to relax into the silence when he set down his glass without drinking from it and looked at her with the particular attention of a man who had been thinking about something for a long time and had decided now was the moment. No one really knows who you are, do they? It wasn't a question. The words came out careful and certain, the way someone speaks when they're not asking for information but offering it. Mara's fork moved once over her plate. I don't understand what you mean, Mr. Campbell. Nolan. The correction came without inflection, like something that had been pending since the morning. We're engaged. Calling me Mr. Campbell in front of people will look wrong. The corner of his mouth shifted. And I'd rather hear my name. Of course. She held his gaze and looked back at her plate. He picked up his fork. He did not use it. His elbow came to rest on the table, his chin settling into his hand, and his eyes came back to her with an attention so steady it was almost difficult to sustain. There's a motorcycle in my garage. His voice was even, conversational, carrying no more weight than if he'd mentioned the weather. Matte black. Triumph speed, twin 900. Mara's fork went still. Why are you telling me that? Because you know exactly how it feels to ride one. He was watching her face with the patience of a man who had decided to wait for a specific reaction and was prepared to wait as long as necessary. The one in my garage is the same model you rode at Stanford. The fork touched the plate with a sound too controlled to be accidental. She set it down deliberately. Her hands folded in her lap, where he couldn't see what they were doing. You researched me, Mr. Campbell. The words came out flat. Not a question. A reckoning. His gaze was steady, faintly amused, not apologetic in the slightest. Nolan. She looked up at him. The correction landed exactly where he intended it to. You're my fiancé on paper. He leaned back in his chair, the amusement deepening by a fraction. Journalists will dig into your history the moment they have a story. I needed to know everything before they did, including the things your father doesn't know. The back of her neck prickled. She kept her spine straight and her expression somewhere between controlled and expensive. His version of you is Stanford, finance, a good daughter, a quiet life. His eyes hadn't left her face. The kind of biography a man writes for a daughter he's never actually looked at. The real file was more interesting. Mara's jaw tightened, her eyes dropped to her plate. Silence was the only negotiating position she had left. "You were arrested at Stanford." The words landed the way someone delivers something they have already handled. "November 2018, 14 students outside a defense industry recruitment fair. You were one of them. I had the record cleared. I couldn't allow it to become press material." She looked at him for a long moment with a smile that was not warm and a shrug that cost nothing. "Powerful of you." Her voice came out dry. She started to say his name, caught herself, and set her fork down instead. His eyes narrowed. He reached across the small distance between them, 2 fingers finding her chin, and turned her face toward his with a gentleness she had not expected and was not prepared to be affected by. "I am." His voice dropped. "But you're not as agreeable as you look. Everyone who knows you has missed it. Your father, the people who employed you, the man who was about to put a ring on your finger in a ballroom full of his family's contacts." His gaze moved over her face with the focused attention of a man reading something he's been waiting a long time to understand. "There's something in you that nobody has ever been allowed to see." Her chin stayed level in his fingers. She did not look away. "You're a rebel." His voice came even, certain. "You've been carrying a fire you couldn't put out even when everyone around you needed you to." The corner of his mouth lifted. "You love danger. You just learn to hide it better than most people learn to hide anything." "I have ideals." The words came out steady, precise. "That's not the same thing." Something lit in his eyes. "Say my name." His voice dropped further. An invitation with the structure of a challenge. He was still holding her chin, and he made no move to release it. "I want to hear it from you. Just that." The space between them had been receding so gradually, she hadn't registered when it became this small. She was aware of his hand, aware of her own heartbeat in a way that was inconvenient and specific. She removed her chin from his fingers with a movement that was slow enough to be deliberate. His hand dropped. She watched it happen. The deliberate withdrawal, the way he settled back into his chair with the practiced ease of a man who had been doing this a long time. Containing something, disciplining it. Control, she thought, only works if there's something underneath it that needs controlling. The two of them looked at each other across the distance of half a table setting. His eyes were waiting, patient and entirely certain. "Don't," some part of her said. She whispered his name like she was setting something down on a table she might not be able to pick back up. "Nolan." She made it sound like a dare. His jaw tightened. A single motion, barely there, the only sign of something that had not stayed as controlled as the rest of him. "Better?" he murmured. Mara lifted her chin. "Don't get used to it." His smile came slow. "I already have." She looked at him across the table and understood something she had not been ready to understand before tonight. "This is who you actually are, Nolan Campbell. Not the face the press had photographed twice in 5 years. Not the name on the defense contracts, not the man the journalists outside his gate were still trying to reach. This, the man who watched her across a dinner table knowing things about her that no one had bothered to learn, and found them worth knowing. Dangerous, she thought, exactly at my edge, and not moving back. Nolan watched her eyes sharpen. There she is, the real Mara Whitmore. Contained fire. A woman trained to lower her voice while her blood kept running wild underneath. A woman who had hidden speed and rage from a father who thought silence meant surrender. For 5 years, nothing had tempted him toward danger. Now danger was sitting across his own table, chin up, spine straight, pretending his hand hadn't just moved her. He recognized the fire she had buried. She recognized the danger he had disciplined. And neither of them was going to say it out loud. Not yet. Mara set her napkin beside her plate and pushed her chair back. That was good. Her voice returned to its usual register, composed and clean and giving nothing further away. "I'm done. Good night." She stood. She did not look back at him. His voice came from behind her as she reached the doorway. Quiet, unhurried, with the specific quality of a question that had been waiting the entire evening for its moment. "Why did you agree to this, Mara Whitmore?" She stopped walking but did not turn. "Those eyes of yours." His voice was low, even, completely without heat. The voice of a man who had spent 5 years watching everything carefully and had no intention of stopping now. They look like you're waiting to be rescued. But that's not it, is it? Not a question, a conclusion being reached out loud. There's something behind them, a plan you haven't told me about yet. The corridor stretched ahead of her. Mara did not answer. She kept walking. And the sound of her heels on the marble was the only thing left in the room. The mirror gave her back someone she wasn't entirely sure she recognized. Mara stood in the black lace. Her hand moved to the base of her throat without her deciding to move it. Nolan. The name moved through her before she could stop it, a whisper that never left her lips. It had been living somewhere under her sternum since she walked away from that dinner table, and she could feel it there now, specific and inconvenient. She thought about his hand at her chin, the way his jaw had tightened at that single whispered syllable, the green of his eyes in candlelight, that particular stillness in them that she kept finding herself trying to read. She thought about what he stood for, what his company built, the things she had stood in a cold November in Palo Alto to protest, surrounded by 14 other people who believed that corporate defense profit and government policy should never share a room, and now she was living in his house, carrying his name in the papers, eating his food, thinking about his name. Her eyes moved from her own reflection to the window. "Stop it, Mara." The thought came sharp. "You cannot be attracted to this man. You are not doing this." She turned away from the mirror before the mirror could answer back. Sleep came faster than she expected. She lay in the dark with her eyes closed, and the last conscious thing she registered was his voice. Low, deliberate, weighted, asking for something most people wouldn't dare ask for. "Say my name." She was still hearing it when she went under. Something pulled her back, not a sound exactly, a change in the quality of the air, the particular heaviness of a room that holds more than one person. Her eyes opened. A hand covered her mouth before she could make a sound. "Don't." The voice was low, close, warm with something that wasn't warmth at all. "I just came to talk." Mara's heart slammed against her ribs. Her eyes adjusted in the dark. The pale light from the city outside, the open balcony door she hadn't opened herself, the shape of a man sitting on the edge of her bed, leaning over her with a smile she could see, even in the dark. Preston Atkins. His hand withdrew slowly. He settled back like a man making himself comfortable. "You looked beautiful sleeping." His gaze dropped, moving over the black lace with a slow deliberateness that made her skin crawl. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "I've been underestimating you, apparently." Mara pushed herself upright, pulling her knees to her chest, putting every inch of space between them that the bed allowed. Her voice came out in a whisper, sharp enough to cut. "What are you doing in my room?" Not a question. A warning. "Tell me right now, or I will scream loud enough that Nolan's men will shoot you before they figure out who you are." Preston shrugged, entirely unbothered. "They're downstairs, playing cards." He tilted his head, his eyes still on her. "I practically grew up in this house. I know where the cameras aren't." Cameras. The word landed differently than he intended it to. Sleeping alone in that, his gaze moved over the lace again, was a waste. "Get out of my room." Her voice had dropped to something colder and more controlled than she'd expected from herself. "Get out right now, or you will regret this." "Don't." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, adopting the posture of someone who thinks he's doing you a favor. "I came to help you, whether you want to believe that or not." She almost laughed. "Help me." Preston's eyes moved over her face. When he spoke again, the performance had dropped out of his voice. "You're sitting on something dangerous, and you don't even see it." He let the sentence breathe for a moment. "My Uncle Nolan has been a target for a long time. Do you know why his wife died?" Mara kept her face still and let him talk. "Nolan made a deal go away." Preston's voice had leveled out, dropped the performance. "Weapons. Manufactured outside the usual channels, moving through agreements that weren't supposed to exist. When he decided it violated government policy and walked away from it, they didn't forgive him." His eyes moved briefly to the open balcony door, then back. "They don't come for the man directly. That's not how they work. They come for what he loves. They take that from him and they let him live with it. His expression flickered, something almost real behind the studied nonchalance. Evelyn was what he loved, and now he can't walk out the front door of his own house. The room was very quiet. So that was it. The hand that had trembled at the press conference, the way he had stopped dead at the threshold, the stagger when they came back inside. She had filed all of it quietly and told herself it wasn't her information to read. Now someone had handed her the key. "You've been in the papers now." Preston's voice shifted back into something harder. "They know your face. They know your name next to his." His eyes held hers. "Being with Nolan Campbell means being a target. You understand that?" Mara swallowed once. She would not let him see it cost her anything. "You're his family." Her voice was even. "That means you're in the same position." Preston laughed. A short, genuine sound with nothing warm in it. "Everyone in this city knows Nolan doesn't care much about what happens to me." He spread his hands. "I'm not what he values, which means I'm not what they'd use." His eyes came back to her. "But you?" "Get out of my room, Preston." She held his gaze without blinking. "I mean it. Don't come near me again." He studied her for a moment. The practiced concern left his face. What replaced it had always been underneath it. "Wow." His voice dropped, slow and deliberate. "You are something else, Mara. I thought you were vanilla." His eyes moved over her. "But you're something wild and kinky, aren't you?" A smile that had nothing apologetic in it. "My mistake." His hand moved to her leg, her palm connected with his face before the thought had fully formed. His head snapped sideways. In the half-second before he recovered, she was already moving, but he caught both her wrists, his grip locking, his face coming close to hers. "We both ended up in the same situation." His voice had gone quiet and certain. "Both pushed towards something neither of us chose. Doesn't that mean something?" His eyes dropped to her mouth. "I've decided I actually want you, Mara. Not because of my father, because—" "Get off me!" Her voice cracked through the dark like something breaking. "Don't touch me! Get off me!" Then the door opened. Not a knock, not a warning, just the handle turning and the frame filling with light from the corridor, and Nolan Campbell standing in it. White shirt, dark trousers. The hour on his face was 3 in the morning, and the expression on it was something far older and colder than that. His voice came out low, the kind of low that didn't need to get louder to make your skin go cold. "Take your hands off her, Preston." He stepped into the room. "Unless you want me to kill you right here." Preston released her wrists and stood from the bed in a single motion, turning to face him. "Uncle Nolan?" The performance was back, half assembled. "Or did you put a camera in here too?" He glanced around the room with exaggerated interest. Mara went still. Is he really watching this room? She didn't have time to finish the thought. Nolan crossed the room in 3 strides and hit Preston once, clean and precise, across the nose. Preston went down. He was getting back up when Michael stepped in from the doorway and took hold of his arm. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. The word wouldn't come. Michael appeared in the doorway, his composure intact in the particular way it always was, but his jaw tight. "Boss." His voice was controlled. "I'm sorry. He came through the utility access to the garden. Must have climbed to the balcony from there. That's on me." Nolan looked at him, a single look. It held everything he wasn't going to say out loud. Preston yanked his arm free from Michael's grip. He walked toward the door, still talking, his voice dropping to something that wanted to sound like dignity. "You can't just take what was mine." At the threshold he turned, one hand pressed to his nose, blood on his fingers. "You shouldn't have done this." Nolan's back was to him. His eyes were on Mara. "She was never yours." His voice was flat and final, the way he stated things that weren't open for discussion. "Stop dreaming." Michael walked Preston out. The door closed. The room was quiet again. The balcony door was moving in the night air. Mara was still sitting against the headboard, her knees drawn to her chest. Nolan came to the side of the bed. He sat on the edge of it. 2 fingers found the side of her throat, the pulse point, and stayed there. Her lips parted. His jaw tightened once. Her pulse was running faster than fear alone explained, and they both knew it. He withdrew his hand, slowly. The way you set something down carefully because you know what happens if you don't. He looked at her for a moment without speaking. His eyes dropped briefly to the black lace, then came back to her face. There it is, she thought. Whatever this is, I owe you an apology. His voice came quiet. I couldn't keep you safe in my own house. He looked away first, toward the open balcony door. I'll make sure this doesn't happen again. Her teeth caught her lower lip. There were things sitting in her chest. The cameras, Grant, the arms deal Preston had laid out in the dark, and none of them were ready yet. How did you know he was here? Her eyes held his. How did you know to come? Nolan rose from the bed. He moved to the window, his back half turned to her, one hand resting on the frame. The city below was still and dark. I don't sleep well. His voice was even. I heard something. Mara was looking at him, the screens in his study, every feed running simultaneously. Or did you put a camera in here too? Preston's voice, the theatrical glance around the room. Nolan's answer had come smooth, unhesitating, almost certainly untrue. She could still feel the place on her throat where his fingers had been. She didn't ask again. Mara lay in the dark for 20 minutes before she gave up on sleep entirely. She sat up. The room was quiet. She reached for the lamp. The light came on. She sat still for a moment, then did what she'd been stopping herself from doing since Preston's voice in the dark. She looked. Every corner. The smoke detector, the frame of the window, the molding above the door. She didn't know what she was looking for exactly. She wasn't a security expert, but she looked anyway, the way you check a room you've just been told might not be entirely yours. She couldn't find anything. That didn't mean there was nothing. She wrapped the robe over her nightgown and went downstairs. The house was dark and quiet. Her bare feet found the marble of the staircase. She moved carefully, one hand on the rail. She was passing the study when she stopped. The light was on, not bright, the lamp on the far side, the one near the window, just enough to outline a man standing with his back to the door, a glass in his hand, looking out at the dark grounds below. Mara pushed the door open. You're still awake. Nolan turned from the window. His gaze moved over her, robe, bare feet, the hour, and came back to her face. So are you. I came down for water. She stayed in the doorway, her shoulder against the frame. He nodded once and turned back to the window. Instead, she came into the room, and the door swung half-closed behind her. She found the wall across from him and leaned against it, arms crossed over her chest, watching the side of his face. The grounds were dark through the glass. The iron gate at the end of the drive was just visible, a silhouette against the city lights. Mara looked at it, then at him. She kept her voice even when she spoke. Can you not go outside? Nolan's grip shifted on his glass. He didn't answer immediately. Is that why your hand trembled? Yesterday morning at the press conference. He lifted the glass and drank. His eyes stayed on the window. This is not a conversation I want to have. His voice was measured. But since you're my fiancée. He turned and looked at her. That look, the one from the first night, the one that moved through her before she could stop it. You deserve to know. She kept her arms where they were and waited. 5 years ago. He turned back to the window. My wife died in front of those gates. Mara's feet went cold against the marble. She kept very still. I was 20 feet away. His voice was steady in the way that required effort. Close enough that I ran toward her. Too far to do anything that mattered when I got there. He swallowed. She was watching his throat move. The scar? She kept her voice quiet. Her eyes moved to his forearm before she could stop them, the pale-heeled line she'd seen that first night, and filed away without asking. That was from... I was in the hospital for a week. He didn't look at her. Burns from trying to pull her out. Then I came home. The glass turned in his hand, and every time I tried to go back outside, my body refused, reactions that came close to making me faint. Mara's arms tightened across her chest. She pressed them inward. That's called agoraphobia. She kept her voice even, clinical enough not to make it an accusation. A lot of people develop it after traumatic events. The body remembers the threat and tries to prevent you from, I'm not a lot of people. His voice didn't rise. It just landed differently. I'm probably the last person who should be experiencing something like this. Mara looked at him, at the controlled posture, the glass in his hand. You're still just a person. Everyone has something that can break them. That's not a flaw. That's just how it is. His jaw shifted. We're not as different as you'd like to think. She kept her eyes on his profile. You and me. The silence between them held the weight of two people who had found different ways to live with the same kind of damage. She pushed off from the wall. I saw a psychologist for a while, someone who works specifically with this kind of trauma. If you ever wanted, I could arrange for them to come here. Nolan turned. The expression on his face was sitting just underneath anger, a man who had been managing something for a long time and did not want it named. I don't need your pity, Mara. His voice was quiet. You asked. I told you. I manage. His eyes held hers. Good night. She straightened her robe and stepped through the door. Behind her she heard the clink of his glass being set down. In the corridor, her bare feet found the cool marble again. She walked toward the stairs. Maybe what you're fighting isn't your trauma, she thought. Maybe it's your ego, Nolan Campbell. She was halfway up the first step when she saw Edith. The older woman was standing at the far end of the corridor, still and upright, hands folded in front of her. She was watching Mara with an expression that wasn't quite readable, something cooler than concern, something older than disapproval. Their eyes met. Edith held the look for one deliberate second before she turned and disappeared back down the corridor. Mara stood on the step. She climbed the rest of the stairs and exhaled at the top. Does anyone in this house actually sleep? Mara set her alarm for 6. By 6:40 she was dressed, her bag on her shoulder, moving through the corridor with her shoes in her hand so the heels wouldn't carry. The study door was closed, the light underneath it was off. She didn't stop. George was already at the front steps when she came out. He didn't ask why she was 2 hours early. He just opened the door. On the drive to Whitmore Group, she was watching the city come awake outside the window and trying not to think about the conversation in the study, the iron gate visible through the glass, the way Nolan had said 20 feet away without any particular expression on his face, which was somehow worse than if he'd had one. She was also thinking about Preston, not with sympathy, with the particular alertness of someone who had been reminded of something they'd been trying not to look at directly. Russian Mafia, a bomb at a gate, a dead wife named Evelyn. And now Mara, in the papers, in the house, in the middle of all of it. She pressed her fingertips against her knee and watched Seattle sharpen in the early light. By 8 she had a window and Seattle below her. The city was fully awake, fairy lights crossing the sound, the particular grey-blue of a Seattle morning that never fully committed to either color. She'd been staring at it long enough that the coffee had cooled by 2 degrees before she noticed she hadn't been drinking it. Her phone buzzed on the desk. Unknown number. She looked at it, looked at the window, looked at it again. She picked up. Mara. The voice came careful and low, like someone checking a door was locked before they spoke. Are you there? Her hand went still around the mug. Elias? A name she hadn't said in 4 years. A voice she would have recognized in any room, which told her something she hadn't wanted to know about herself. I called early? His voice carried the specific tension of someone who had prepared what they were going to say and was now measuring each word against it. I didn't want anyone around when we talked. Mara set the mug down. Her eyes went back to the window. Elias. She kept her voice level. Why now? It's been years. His answer came without hesitation. I need to see you. Mara turned back to the window. That's not really possible right now. Because you got engaged. His voice shifted, the careful tone giving way to something raw underneath. He was quiet for a second on his end. To Nolan Campbell. Have you really changed that much? Is there no one else in the world, Mara? You got engaged to an arms dealer. Her jaw tightened. She kept it out of her voice. I don't owe you an explanation, Elias. She turned from the window and moved to the other side of her desk, putting the width of it between herself and nothing in particular. "And for the record, this is a strategic arrangement. That's all it is." The words came out steadier than what was happening in her chest when she said them. "Is it, though?" She didn't let the question reach her face. This wasn't that kind of call. "I can't meet with you," she continued. "People are watching everything I do right now, so tell me why you actually called." The line went quiet for a moment. Then the shift she recognized, Elias moving from the personal into the cause, the way he always had, like throwing a switch. "We used to want the same things." His voice came quieter now. "You remember that? We stood against everything Campbell and his industry represents. I keep wondering if that person is still somewhere in there." Mara's eyes stayed on the window. "Get to the point." He did. 2 weeks from now, on the 23rd, Campbell Group is opening a new weapons facility in the Ravnik Republic. His voice had found its rhythm now, the one she remembered from meetings and late-night arguments in campus buildings. "The coverage will call it a defense investment, regional security, jobs, the usual language." Mara was standing very still. "But what we're hearing is different. We think this facility isn't just for production." He let that land before he continued. "We think they're planning to test new weapon systems there, things that would never get cleared on American or European soil, systems that haven't gone through the oversight they'd require here." Mara's free hand found the edge of the desk. Her fingers pressed into it slowly, without her deciding to. "Mara," his voice dropped further, "you're inside Campbell's world now. You have access to things I don't. All I'm asking is this: find out what the Ravnik factory is actually for. Is it really defense production? Or is it something else?" He paused. Not for effect, she knew, but because this was the part that cost him something to ask. "If you can find a document, a contract, an email, anything that shows the real purpose of what they're building there." The Seattle skyline was doing nothing useful. Mara pressed her thumbnail against her palm. Not hard enough to mark, just enough to feel. "I need to think about it." Her voice came out even. "And don't read that as a yes." "I wouldn't." Something in his voice softened. Not the cause, not the argument, but the person underneath both of those things, the one she'd known before she knew how to be careful with herself. "I've always believed in you, Mara, even when everything around you was pulling you in directions you didn't choose." The words came quieter now, stripped of the argument. "I believed you actually cared about people, that you wanted to leave things better than you found them." She didn't speak. His voice dropped to something that had nothing to do with Campbell Group or Ravnik or any of it. "You know that I loved you, Mara, more than I've known how to say. You were someone I could have trusted with everything I was." He stopped there, let it breathe. "Make this decision with your conscience, not with strategy." The call ended. Mara put her phone face down on the desk. She looked at the window, at the ferry lights still moving across the Sound, at the city that had no opinion about any of this. Her thumbnail had left a faint mark on her palm where she'd pressed it. The problem wasn't deciding, she thought. The problem was that she already knew what her conscience was going to say. And she wasn't ready to hear it yet. She pulled up her inbox. Her hands were steady. She made sure of that first. The Campbell Group call had ended 20 minutes ago. 3 of the feeds on Nolan's screens were still running the tail end of it. Men in conference rooms on different continents, the bland language of acquisition discussions, logistics wrapped in the vocabulary of investment. He'd been in that world long enough to hear what lived underneath the words. Michael was standing to his left, the way he always stood, slightly back, slightly angled, close enough to hear, but never in the way. Preston didn't contact her. Michael kept his voice even and factual, the way Nolan preferred information. She was in the office all day, lunch at her desk, 4 calls from her personal phone. He paused. 1 second, no longer. 3 of them tracked. A friend, dry cleaner, a client of Whitmore's. Nolan turned from the Campbell feeds. The 4th? Unknown number. Michael's jaw shifted slightly. The kind of phone that gets bought with cash and used once or twice. Nolan looked at him for a moment. Not Preston. No. Nolan's eyes came back to the screen. Then who? Michael's expression stayed even. Working on it. Give me a few days. We'll have the city of origin and where it was purchased. Nolan nodded once and turned back to the screens. He pulled up the morning's security footage. The timestamp read 6:41. Mara in the front corridor, coat on, bag on her shoulder, shoes in her hand, moving quickly and quietly, the way someone moves when they're trying not to be heard. He watched it once. Then he stopped it. The frame froze on her face, her eyes. She was looking toward the front door. But for the half-second before she looked away, there was something in her expression he hadn't been able to name the first time he'd seen it. He still couldn't entirely. His jaw tightened. Mara Whitmore. The name came out low, barely audible, not really for Michael. Full of surprises, aren't you? He left the frame frozen and reached for the Campbell files. The city was doing that thing it did in the late afternoon, the light coming in sideways off the water, turning everything briefly gold before the grey came back. Mara was watching it through the car window without seeing much of it. George glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "You all right, Miss Whitmore?" His voice had the careful tone of someone who'd noticed something but wasn't going to push it. "Something on your mind?" "No." She caught herself. "Sorry. Long day." He nodded and returned his eyes to the road. She was watching the light on the buildings for a moment longer, then, "George, did you know Evelyn Campbell?" The question landed quietly between them. In the mirror, something moved across his face. Not surprise exactly, more like a door opening that he'd been keeping carefully shut. "I've worked for Mr. Campbell 15 years. His voice came out measured, with something underneath it that was real. "Of course I knew her." His hand stayed steady on the wheel. "I was very fond of her." Mara kept her eyes on his profile. "What actually happened to her?" George's chin lifted slightly. "An assassination." The word came out the way he'd said it before. Not for the first time. It broke him. The car moved through the afternoon traffic. Mara let the quiet sit for a moment before she went further. "Did she work? Did she have a career?" "Evelyn?" Something shifted in George's voice, a small warmth that hadn't been there before. "She was the finance director of Campbell Group. Sharp as anyone in that building." He signaled for a turn. "She and Mr. Campbell met at MIT. They'd been together a long time before he started the company. She was there before most of it existed." Mara sat with that. MIT finance director. There for the beginning of all of it. She did the calculation quietly. Nolan was 39. If they'd met at university, that was close to 15 years together before the gate, before the explosion, before the scar and the locked doors and the house that had become everything. That kind of man, she thought, that kind of love. One woman for that long, before everything. She'd seen the silver frame on his desk, the face she'd recognized from the news photograph. She'd filed it and kept moving because that's what you do when something lands before you're ready for it. She wasn't sure she was ready for it now either. The car turned through the gate and the mansion came into view. "Good evening, George." She gathered her bag and stepped out. The gravel was quiet under her feet as she walked toward the front door. The evening had gone that grey-blue Seattle color, the kind that settled over everything without asking permission. She was halfway up the path when she felt it, the particular weight of being watched from above, not sensed, known. She didn't look up, but she knew which window. The evening had gone quiet, not still, just held. Mara was standing at the terrace railing with her arms crossed over her chest, not for warmth, not yet, but because it was the only thing that felt like a decision. The grounds below were going dark at the edges. The iron gate was just visible at the end of the drive. None of it was getting clearer out here. She heard the footsteps and knew them, their weight controlled and deliberate, a man who had learned not to move carelessly. Then his jacket settled over her shoulders, still warm from him. "You'll get cold." Nolan's voice came from just behind her, low and even. "It's a cool night." She didn't answer immediately. The jacket smelled like him. Cedar and something darker. Nolan moved to the railing beside her, not close enough to crowd, close enough that the evening light caught the line of his jaw when she turned to look. He was already looking at her. He watched longer than he needed to, slow, deliberate, attention that lingered at her mouth before it came back up. She looked away first. Maybe there's no point in me being here. Her voice came out steadier than what was happening in her chest. We can be engaged from separate addresses. Preston can't actually touch me if I'm not in this house. She felt more than heard him shift his weight. Do you want to leave, Mara? She turned to look at him. Would you stop me? He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he reached out and brushed the hair the breeze had blown across her face. 2 fingers, light, tucking it back behind her ear. She went still, in the particular way that had nothing to do with trying to be still. Yes. His hand dropped, unhurried, back to the railing. I would do everything I could. Her chin came up. You'd lock me in. The corner of his mouth moved. The small version of the smile. The one that didn't quite commit. I'd ask you to stay? Mara swallowed. She looked back out at the grounds. Why? The word came out before she'd fully formed it. Why do you want me here? He turned toward her. One finger found her jaw, gentle, and turned her face back toward his. Mara? The way he said it. Her name. Just her name. Did something to the inside of her chest she was going to have to address at some point. Why do you work so hard not to say mine? Does it unsettle you that much? She opened her mouth. The terrace door opened behind them. Edith stood in the frame, composed and upright, her expression carefully neutral. Dinner is ready, Mr. Campbell? Whenever you're ready. She withdrew before anyone answered. Nolan turned back to Mara. He extended his hand, open palm. Come on, let's eat something. Mara looked at his hand. Is this courtesy, she thought, or is it something else? She set her hand into his before she finished deciding. His fingers closed around hers, firm, certain. They walked inside. She didn't take her hand back. He didn't let it go. The plate landed in front of her and Mara looked at it. Then she laughed, a real one, surprised out of her. A burger. Nolan was filling her glass without looking up. Chef's special, cheeseburger, short rib, mushroom sauce. Mara stared at the plate. Her fork was still in her hand, going nowhere. She looked up at him, eyebrows pulled together, eyes slightly narrowed, the expression of someone running a calculation they didn't expect to need. This is my favorite burger. He set down the wine and picked up his knife. He measured instead of reacting. She was still watching him. He planned this. You can't actually know that. He looked up from his plate. Funny coincidence. Mara took a large bite. She was still smiling as she chewed. She watched him cut through his burger with the knife. Precise, no mess. And something about it was so completely him that she had to look away before she said anything she'd regret. If this is what dinner looks like every night, she said to her plate, leaving here is going to be harder than I planned. Nolan's knife stilled for a fraction of a second, then he continued cutting. Tell my chef what you want tomorrow. His voice came even, like everything he said when it mattered. Learning what you like. I'm looking forward to that. Mara looked up. He was already looking at her. Dinner ended the way evenings do when something unfinished sits between two people, with a chair pushed back and an excuse that wasn't really an excuse. Nolan's guests had arrived from overseas. He went to meet them. The east living room door closed behind him. 3 voices, low, the quiet register of business talk. Mara waited until Edith's footsteps moved toward the kitchen. Then she walked to the study. 12 screens, every corner of the house, running simultaneously. She stood in front of them for a moment. The east entrance, the gate, the corridor outside the living room where Nolan's guests were settling in. Then she moved to the desk. The laptop was open, the screen still lit. She turned once toward the bookcase behind her, slow, as if she'd come in to find something to read. The corridor was empty. No footsteps. She sat down. Why am I even here? She murmured. Not for the room, just for herself. She already knew the answer to the logistics. It was the other question underneath it she didn't have an answer to. She took the USB from her pocket and pressed it into the port. A window opened. She clicked through 3 prompts. The progress bar appeared. 7 minutes remaining. Her attention caught on the silver frame at the corner of the desk. Evelyn. Blonde. Composed. The kind of face that looked like it had never been caught off guard. She was looking at the camera the way people look at someone they love standing just behind it. Whatever she was, whatever she built, Mara thought, he was a man who loved someone. He had that in him. The screen read 5 minutes 8 seconds. Mara turned to the drawers. She opened the first, files, labelled in Nolan's handwriting. The second, contracts, older ones, the paper yellowed at the corners. She didn't know what she was looking for. She kept moving. The third drawer caught, the antique wood swelling against the frame, and when she forced it, it came out entirely in her hands. She shoved it back. Her fingers slipped. Something fell from the hidden panel at the back. A narrow compartment built into the rear of the frame, the kind that only reveals itself when the drawer comes out completely. The wood around it was dusty, undisturbed. A notebook, black cover, hard, medium-sized, the kind you'd keep on a nightstand. She picked it up, handwriting on the inside of the cover. Neat, slightly forward-leaning cursive. Evelyn Jones Campbell. Notes toward a life. Mara's thumb stilled on the page. She forced the drawer back into its frame with both hands, too fast, the wood catching, and pressed until it held. 1 minute remaining. The sound of footsteps reached her from the corridor. Unhurried at first, then faster. Mara closed the notebook and shoved it between her shirt and the back of her waistband in one motion, pulling her blouse down over it. She was on her feet. Her hand stayed on the USB. The screen read 13 seconds. The footsteps slowed outside the door. Then Nolan's voice, from somewhere just beyond it, low, directed elsewhere. "Edith? Have you seen Mara?" Mara's hand pressed flat over the USB port. The door opened. Mara's body reacted before her mind finished the thought. Her fingers moved the USB into her pocket in one motion, not a decision, just instinct. She was still holding Evelyn's photo, the silver frame cool against her palm, when Nolan stepped into the room and saw her. He stopped. "Mara." His voice carried no edge, but it was deliberate, calibrated. "What are you doing in here?" She swallowed, held his gaze. "I was wondering what kind of person she was, Nolan." Her voice came out steadier than the pulse she could feel in her throat. "Your wife." He took that in without speaking. Then his mouth settled into the faint version of a smile, the one that lived at the corner and didn't commit. She'd said his name, and he'd noticed. He walked toward her. He stopped close. Close enough that the room felt smaller. She was still leaning against the desk, the frame in her hands, and there was nowhere to go. Her face was warm. She was aware of it. One finger rose, barely touching, the contact so light she wasn't sure it counted, and moved slowly along her cheekbone. Her spine registered it before the rest of her did. Her skin felt newly awake. His hand dropped. He was watching her face when he asked it. "What are you curious about?" "Who she was." Mara held her ground. "What it was like between you." She let a moment pass. "What really happened to her?" A pained smile crossed his face, the kind that cost something to make. He looked down at her hand, gripping the edge of the desk. Then he covered it with his own, slow, and drew it into his palm. "Are you afraid to be close to me, Mara?" The USB was in her pocket. She shook her head. "No." Her voice was quiet. "I feel safe." "You should be more careful," something in her chest said. "Saying true things to dangerous men." Nolan lifted her hand. His lips pressed against her knuckles, slow, deliberate. A gesture that made no claim and every claim at once. Then he leaned in. His mouth was close enough to her ear that she could feel the warmth of him when he spoke. "I'm glad." His voice dropped to something she felt more than heard. "I need you to be." Her breath forgot what it was doing for a moment. She turned her face slightly, not toward him, just away from the wall she'd been using as an anchor. His presence was pressing into her awareness from the side, close and still and very intentional. "The back garden." She kept her voice steady. It's beautiful this time of evening. Would you come sit with me? He pulled back just enough to look at her, tilted his head. You know, I can't go outside. I know. She was still holding his hand. She looked at it, then at him. She took one step closer, deliberate, eyes on his. Maybe it's different when you're holding mine. Nolan went very still. He was studying her face for a long moment. Not suspicious now, not calculating, something she hadn't seen in him before. I need to make a call first. His voice was even, but his hand hadn't moved. Of course. Mara began to draw her hand back. He held it 1 second longer than he should have. She felt the exact moment he let go. She picked up her pace only after she reached the doorway. Slow, controlled, the way she'd learned from watching him. She didn't look back. She could feel exactly where his eyes were. Mara closed her door and stood against it for a moment with her eyes shut. Her cheeks were burning. She reached behind her back, pulled out the notebook and set it carefully in her bag. The USB went into her wallet. I'm sorry, she thought, and wasn't sure who she was apologizing to. She looked at her hand, the one he'd pressed his lips against, her stomach pulled tight. She crossed to the mirror, fixed her hair, straightened the collar of her white silk blouse. Then she walked back out. Nolan stood in the study with his eyes on the door after she left. Then his gaze moved to the laptop. He pulled out his phone. Michael, his voice came clipped, the way it did when he was already past the question and into the answer. Check the computer logs. I need to know if there was any activity in this room in the last 15 minutes. Pull the camera feeds too. He ended the call and slid the phone into his pocket. He straightened Evelyn's photo on the desk, one small adjustment, and turned to the window. The back garden was below, the grass still lit from the last of the evening. He was still looking at it when he reached for his jacket. The garden sat at the highest point of the property, a gentle slope opening to a view of the water in the distance. The outdoor chairs caught the last warmth of the day. Mara walked out across the grass and stood looking at the sea. The evening air was cool, but she was still running so warm from what had happened in the study that she couldn't feel it. She heard the terrace door open behind her. When she turned, Nolan was standing in the frame, one hand on the door jamb, not stepping through, just looking at her across the length of the garden. She extended her hand toward him, palm up. You could try coming to me. His smile came pained, real, with something underneath it that had cost something to form. I don't put myself in that position in front of anyone, Mara. She took 3 slow steps toward him. I'm not anyone. She kept her voice steady and her hand out. I'm not some person who happened to be here. And you're not avoiding this because you're afraid. She looked at him. You're avoiding it because you refuse to need help. Her hand stayed extended. I want you to try. Please. He looked at the threshold. 1 foot crossed it. His hand began to tremble at his side. Not much, just the start of it. Mara saw it and didn't look away from his face. She took 1 step closer. Just look at my eyes, nothing else. He brought the other foot through. Mara smiled. She tilted her head toward the chairs in the garden. Maybe we sit for a few minutes, talk, actually get to know each other. He shook his head. Not refusal. Something else. His eyes stayed on her. You're dangerous, Mara Whitmore. She took 3 deliberate steps forward and stopped directly in front of him. 1 arm's length. She held out her hand again. Sometimes? The word came easy, like a fact she'd long since made peace with. Same as anyone. Nolan took her hand. She drew him toward her slowly, and he let himself be drawn, which told her more than anything he'd said in the study. His eyes closed. Her free hand came up to his face, palm against his jaw. Hey, don't close them. She waited until he opened them. Look at me. They held like that for a moment, his face in her hand, his eyes on hers. 3 feet of garden behind him. His breathing had changed. She could feel it in the way his hand held hers. Mara Whitmore. His voice came low and even, the kind of even that required effort to maintain. If you keep doing this, I'm going to start thinking you actually are my fiancé. The corners of her mouth moved. Nolan Campbell. Her thumb traced the line of his jaw, barely. If it helps right now, go ahead. She stepped back, kept hold of his hand, drew him one step further into the garden. There. She looked at him. 3 steps. Nolan tipped his head back. His breathing was faster now. His hand shook against hers. Mara held it tighter. She brought it up to her own face and pressed his palm against her cheek the way he'd done to her. I'm right here. Just look at me. Only at me. She pulled him one more step into the garden. He reached up with his free hand and ran his thumb along her cheekbone. She smiled, wide, real, the kind that takes over a face before a person decides to let it. Look at that. Her voice came quiet. You can do it. She let go of his hand. 2 steps back, then 3, toward the middle of the garden, away from the threshold, putting distance between them deliberately. I think you can do more. Mara. His voice carried something new in it. Come back here. The sound came from the waterside. Both of them looked up at the same moment. A drone, moving low from the direction of the sound, crossing toward the garden. Mara narrowed her eyes. What is that? She took a few steps toward it. Mara! Nolan's voice sharpened. His balance was starting to go. Come here. Now! 2 security guards were already breaking into a run across the far side of the grounds. Then the drone started dropping things into the garden. Where they landed, small percussive bursts of smoke and pressure bloomed across the lawn. Nolan tried to step toward her. His balance gave out. Mara! One landed 4 feet from where she was standing. The blast hit her as a wall of pressure before she understood what it was. The ground lurched. Her ears went white. She was on her knees in the grass without knowing how she got there, her hands flat on the ground, the world still ringing. Then hands, both of them gripping her arms, pulling her upright in one sharp motion. And Nolan's chest was solid behind her, his arms locking around her, turning her away from the direction the drone had come from. He'd run to her. He'd run to her when his own legs could barely hold him outside. He was already shouting over her head. Michael! Take it down, now! He pulled her tight against his chest and turned his back to the drone. His heartbeat was loud and fast under her ear. He didn't let go. The living room couch received her before she fully understood she was being set down. Nolan's voice cut across the room, sharp, clipped, the register he used when there was no room for interpretation. Edith, first aid kit, and get Dr. Adamski on the phone. Mara blinked at the ceiling. The ringing in her ears hadn't fully cleared. The chandeliers above her were doing something slightly wrong with the light. What's happening? Her voice came out thin. Nolan was already kneeling beside the couch, his hands moving over her, arms, ribs, collarbone. The focused efficiency of someone looking for damage rather than offering comfort. Where does it hurt? Not a question, a scan. I'm fine. She reached up and caught his hands before they could keep moving. Nolan? She held them still. I'm fine. Stop. He looked at her. His face was the controlled version, the one he showed rooms full of people, but his eyes were running a different calculation entirely. Michael stepped into the doorway. 1 drone, boss. 4 devices, sound and smoke, all of them. We brought it down. Nolan's gaze stayed on Mara for 1 more second. I'll be there in a minute. He came back to her side and looked down. Your knee. She looked down, a scrape across the right knee, blood already drying at the edges. Nolan had the first aid kit open on the table. He poured alcohol over a square of gauze, held it up once in warning. This is going to sting. He sat on the edge of the couch beside her and pressed the gauze to the scrape slowly, careful, like something he was trying not to get wrong. Mara didn't flinch. She was watching the top of his head, the set of his shoulders, the way his hands were steadier than they had any right to be, considering where they had both just been. She reached across and set her hand over his. Nolan? He didn't look up from the knee. She waited until his hands went still. Then, quietly, you went outside. Her thumb pressed lightly over his knuckles. You ran to me. You know what that means. He swallowed. His eyes stayed on the gauze. Then he looked at her hand on top of his, and a long moment passed in which he didn't answer and she didn't push. "It doesn't matter." His voice came out level. "Those could have been real devices, and then I wouldn't have been able to—" He stopped, pulled the gauze back, looked at the scrape. "Keeping you safe in this house is my responsibility. This is the second time I've failed at that." Mara looked at the scrape too. "It's a scrape, Nolan. I stumbled when the one next to me went off. Nothing happened." He set the gauze down. His eyes came up to her face, and whatever he found there, he took in without expression. "I want you to go back to your apartment tomorrow morning." Her hand was still on his. "Nolan..." His voice closed the conversation before she could finish the sentence. "George will take you. First thing." She held his gaze. "I'm not going to my father's." "Your own apartment, then." He stood. "I'll have a security team outside around the clock." She was still on the couch, watching him cross to the window. Through the glass, the terrace was hazy. Thin trails of smoke still drifting across the lawn from where the devices had landed. The garden chairs were still where they had been. 3 steps from the threshold. 4. Who would do this? Low, not quite to her. Mara stood. She came to stand beside him at the glass. "I want to stay, Nolan." He didn't turn. "We're not having this conversation." They stood there for a moment, side by side, the garden below them, the smoke still clearing. Michael's footsteps came back down the corridor. "Boss." He stopped in the doorway, holding up his phone. "We pulled this off the drone before it went down." A photograph. The message had been stenciled onto the underside of the body in block letters. No secret weapons, no secret victims, oversight. Nolan turned from the window. He looked at it for a moment, then shook his head slowly. "Activists?" "The timing's interesting." Michael kept his voice neutral. "Ravnik announcement is in 2 weeks." Nolan took the phone, studied the image. Mara didn't move. Her eyes were on the photograph. Her face was doing what it had learned to do in rooms where she couldn't afford to react, holding, steady, giving nothing to the surface. Underneath it, her stomach had turned over once, hard. Elias. She kept her breathing even. Her hands were at her sides. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" The door to her room had barely closed when Mara had her phone in her hand. No missed calls. She pulled up the number Elias had used and pressed call. 3 seconds. 4. The number you have dialed is not available. She set the phone on the bed and pressed both hands flat on top of her head, the way she did when she needed to hold something in that wanted to come out. What am I going to do? The USB was still in her wallet. The notebook was still in her bag. The data she'd copied, if it had copied at all, was sitting somewhere in between, waiting for her to decide what to do with it. She stood up, crossed to the door. The phone buzzed on the bed behind her. Unknown number. She was back across the room before she'd made a conscious decision to move. She picked up. "Mara." Elias's voice careful and low. "Did you get what I asked for?" Her free hand closed around the edge of the dresser. "What were you thinking?" Her voice came out controlled. "Just a drone. You sent a drone to his house, Elias." "We didn't touch anyone." His voice carried the steady conviction of someone who had rehearsed his justification. "We made noise, we made a point. Isn't that what we do? Isn't that always what we've done? These companies profit from weapons that end up in the wrong hands. That makes them part of the problem, Mara. You used to know that." "Don't." The word came out sharper than she meant it to. "Don't tell me what I used to know." She turned from the dresser, her back to the window. "You want to protest Campbell Group? Go stand outside the building with a sign. That's what we do. You don't fly a drone into someone's garden when there are people in it." "Were you hurt?" Something shifted in his voice, the first note of something real underneath the argument. She didn't answer that. "Meet me tomorrow." Back to the cause, the register she recognized. "Whatever you found, bring it. We can still—" "Don't call me again!" The words came out quieter than the ones before them. That was how she knew she meant them. "You're not who I remember, Elias, and I'm not the Mara you're calling." She looked at the bag on the bed, the notebook inside it, the USB in her wallet. "Don't call me again." She ended the call. The room was quiet. Her breathing was the only thing moving. She set the phone down, picked up the wallet, and held it in both hands for a moment without opening it. Then she set it back on the dresser and walked out. Michael was at the screen when Nolan came back in from the grounds. "Boss?" He looked up from the device in his hand. "Unknown number. Just called Mara again. 2 minutes ago." Nolan came to stand beside him. "We have the first phone sourced." Michael pulled up the image on his screen. A still frame, camera angle, a man standing at a counter. "Purchased 3 days ago, a shop on Pike. This is the buyer." Nolan looked at the image. The man was young, mid-20s, hood up, profile half visible. Enough. "Who is he?" Michael opened another window. A profile assembled from public records, arrest logs, university registration. Elias Davis, 26, Stanford, sociology, class of 2022, 3 arrests, campus demonstrations, 2 in California, 1 here. He kept his eyes on the screen. He's one of 3 people who coordinate Oversight's operations. Nolan was quiet for a moment, looking at the photograph. Stanford. He didn't say it out loud. "If you give the order," Michael said, "I can have him located in a few hours." Nolan straightened. "Don't move on this until I tell you." He walked to the door, then to the staircase. His steps were measured going up, not slow, not fast. The steps of a man who already knows what floor he's going to. She was pulling the door shut behind her when she saw him. Nolan was at the end of the corridor, moving toward her. Steady, deliberate, the particular quality of someone who had already decided on the destination. Mara's stomach pulled tight. Guilt or him? She didn't know anymore. He stopped in front of her. One hand came up and moved through her hair, slow, his eyes on her face the whole time. "How are you, Mara?" She looked at him. At the green of his eyes, which were doing something she hadn't seen before, something warmer than his usual register and less controlled. "I'm the one who should be asking you that." "Come inside." He closed the door. When Mara turned to face him, her eyes went straight to his, the green of them, the particular depth she'd been trying not to look at directly. And for a moment, that was the only thing in the room. Nolan saw her looking. He crossed to her in one step and put his arms around her. His mouth pressed against the top of her head. And then his voice came low, close, just for the space between them. "If something had happened to you, I would never forgive myself." His chest was solid against her cheek. She could feel his heartbeat, faster than the rest of him let on. "I can't lose you too, Mara." Her eyes filled. She pressed her hands flat against his back and held on. "Two," she thought, that single word carrying 5 years of weight. "Nolan." Her voice came muffled against his shirt. "I have to tell you something." He pulled back. His hands stayed on her shoulders. He was looking at her face the way he looked at things he intended to understand completely. It's about the drone. I know who did it." Her throat tightened. "Elias, the one heading Oversight. We were at Stanford together. He called me and I—" Nolan's thumb came to her lips. The contact moved through her before she understood what it was. Her spine registered it first. That particular alertness. Instant and involuntary. His eyes stayed on hers, steady, reading whatever her face was doing that she couldn't control. His thumb moved across her lower lip, barely there, the way it had been before, the way it kept being. "You know," she whispered. He nodded once. His hand dropped from her mouth to her jaw, and the backs of his fingers moved along her cheekbone. Slow, the last of an evening she wasn't ready to end. "Rest tonight." His voice was low. "We'll deal with the rest tomorrow." He was turning toward the door when her hand closed around his arm. "Nolan." He stopped, turned back slowly, the way you turn when you already know what you'll see. And see it anyway. She was breathing faster. A heat had started somewhere below her ribs and hadn't stopped moving up. She kept her eyes on his. Do you feel something for me?" His mouth moved. That small version, the corner, the one that never fully committed. His eyes were steady on hers. "If I didn't," he murmured, "you wouldn't be in this house." Mara reached up, slowly. giving him every second to step back. He didn't. She pressed her lips to his, soft, tentative, her hands flat against his chest. He went still, not pulling away, not closing in, just absorbing it the way a man absorbs something he has decided to receive carefully. She pulled back half an inch. The space between them was warm now, warmer than the room. His eyes were on her face, that steady, particular attention that had always felt like being the only thing in the room worth looking at. She pressed her lips to his again, a little longer. His hands found her waist, not gripping, settling. His thumbs pressing into the curve above her hips, a deliberate weight. She felt the breath she'd been holding finally leave her chest. Then her mouth moved to the side of his throat. Mara. Her name came out rough from somewhere underneath the control. The register she hadn't heard before, the voice that didn't get to speak often. He pulled her in. His mouth came back to hers, not soft this time, the kind of kiss that had been held behind everything, the quiet evenings, the careful distance, the particular way he had of looking at her mouth and then looking away. One hand moved to the back of her neck, tilting her head, pressing her closer. The heat of him burned through her shirt, through her skin, settled somewhere low and specific that she was not going to think about yet. When his mouth moved to the curve of her jaw, the side of her throat, the place just below her ear, her hands had found their way to the back of his neck. Then they were moving, slowly, down over his shoulder, along the outside of his arm, until her fingers found the inside of his forearm. The scar. She'd seen it before, pale, long-healed, the kind that comes from heat close enough to leave a permanent mark. Her fingertip traced it now, from the wrist upward, learning the full length of it. Nolan went still. Not the stillness she'd come to recognize in him. Something deeper. Something that had been reached, not chosen. Her finger followed the scar where it disappeared beneath the folded cuff of his sleeve. She pressed her fingertip under the edge of the fabric, slow, careful, and kept going where the mark continued in the hidden part of his arm. His inhale slowed, long, deliberate, the kind that pulls a man back from somewhere his body was already going. A sound came from low in his chest, barely there, involuntary, the first thing she'd heard from him that he hadn't chosen to give. His hands tightened at her waist, not pulling her in, just holding, the grip of a man who had reached his edge and hadn't yet decided what to do at it. She pressed her lips together around the sound that almost came out. The inside of her cheek pulled against her back teeth, trying to hold something back that wasn't going to stay held. This, she thought. This is what he carries. This is what I want. I don't want to go, she whispered against his ear. Her hands had found their way back up, over his shoulder, up to the back of his neck, and they tightened there now. I want to stay. With you. His hands stayed at her waist. Every muscle in him went quiet. The kind of quiet that costs more than movement. His breathing had changed. She could feel it against her temple. Slower now, deliberate, a man pulling himself back from somewhere he'd been moving toward. For a moment, neither of them moved. His forehead came to rest against hers. She could feel his breath against her lips. Warm, slower now, a man trying to remember why he was stopping. His hands moved to her wrists, careful, slow, and drew them down from his neck. He held them at her sides for a moment, his grip warm and firm and unwilling to simply drop her. Mara. Her name came out barely above breath. You mean more to me than I know how to say. His eyes found hers through the small space between them. But not like this. Not tonight. She was starting to speak. You've been in this house for 1 week. His thumb moved once across her knuckle. And look at what's already happened. I want you to be sure. He held her gaze. I need you to be sure. He let her hands go. He took one step back. Then another. His eyes stayed on her face the whole way to the door. He didn't turn. At the threshold, his voice came quiet. Get some sleep. The door closed. The room was very quiet. Mara stood where he'd left her, breathing too fast. Her lower lip caught between her teeth. Her body was still carrying the memory of his hands. Where they'd been, how they'd moved, the heat of him before he stepped away. She walked to the door and leaned back against it. Why do I want him this much? The answer frightened her less than the question. For the first time in her life, wanting something felt more dangerous than being wanted. Mara sat on the bed in her nightgown, Evelyn Campbell's notebook open in her lap. For several minutes, she did not turn the first page. It felt wrong to touch it, wrong to read a dead woman's private thoughts with stolen files hidden in her wallet and Nolan's kiss still living somewhere under her skin. Then she turned the page. September 1st, 2015, Marseille. Our first wedding anniversary. Nolan took me to a restaurant by the water and ordered oysters even though he pretended not to care where we ate. This morning, I woke up to a note beside my pillow. No flowers, no performance, just his handwriting. Just one sentence that reminded me why I have loved him for years and why I will probably love him for the rest of my life. Mara's throat tightened. She turned another page, then another. March 12th, 2017. I am afraid I will never give him a child. 2 years of trying, and every month feels like another quiet failure. I know how much he wants to be a father. Today he took my face in his hands and told me there was nothing he wanted more than me. A child would be a blessing, he said, but you are my life. Mara stopped reading. The words blurred for a moment. She blinked them clear. Evelyn had not written like a woman trying to keep a powerful man. She had written like a woman who had been loved carefully and had never quite known how to survive the size of it. Mara turned more pages. Small things. A dinner, he remembered. A scarf he warmed between his hands before wrapping it around her neck. A night he carried her upstairs from the couch and denied it the next morning. A shoe strap he fixed on one knee because it had been cutting into her skin. Then, near the bottom of one page, Evelyn had written, "If the world ever sees only the dangerous part of him, I hope someone remembers this. Nolan Campbell can destroy a man with one sentence, then kneel on the floor to fix the strap of my shoe because it was hurting me." Below it, in smaller writing, "People think he is made of steel. They have no idea how gently he touches things he loves." Mara wiped at her cheek before she realized she was crying. "A great love," she whispered. The words hurt more than she expected, because it had been. Not a polished marriage, not a convenient one, not the kind of cold arrangement powerful people wore for cameras, a real one. And somehow that made Nolan more dangerous to her, not less. She turned the next page. The date at the top was 3 days before Evelyn died. Most of the page was ordinary. A meeting, a shipment code, a dinner she had forgotten to cancel. Then, at the very bottom, almost as if Evelyn had written it quickly before losing the thought, "C-47 destruction file doesn't close on the Whitmore side." Mara's fingers went still. The room seemed to narrow around the notebook. The next line was smaller. "Missing Whitmore record. Ask Richard Whitmore directly." Mara read the words again. Richard Whitmore. Her father's name did not belong in Evelyn Campbell's private notebook. It did not belong between anniversary notes and shoe straps and a dead woman's careful handwriting. But there it was, sitting at the bottom of the page, like a door left half open. Mara closed the notebook slowly and slid it into her bag. Something slipped from between the pages and fell soundlessly onto the bed. A small piece of hotel stationery, folded once. The paper had yellowed at the edges, but the handwriting was still clear. "Evelyn, I used to think love meant giving a woman the world. Then I woke up beside you and understood I only wanted one world, the one where you are breathing next to me. Happy first anniversary. Nolan." Mara sat very still. The note was not grand. It was not poetic in the way men performed romance when someone was watching. It was worse than that. It was true. And for the first time, Mara understood that Evelyn had not only been loved by Nolan Campbell, she had been chosen by the quietest, deepest part of him, The next day, Mara was in her office before 7:30. She had come early for one reason. She did not want to see Nolan. His kiss was still too close. So was the way he had stopped. Evelyn Campbell's notebook was in her bag, tucked under a scarf, and the USB rested in her palm like something that had no right to feel that heavy. She locked the office door, sat at her desk, and pushed the drive into her laptop. The folders opened. She was staring at them when she typed the word Elias had put in her head. Ravnik. The results came back full. Launch notes, facility plans, staffing reports, public statements. The language of a project that wanted to look transparent, nothing that matched the horror Elias had described. She narrowed the search. Ravnik testing, 3 documents. She opened the third. Inside a folder marked Executive Review. The memo was short, formal, written for people who understood that one paragraph from Nolan Campbell could stop an entire project. Near the bottom, under his initials, Ravnik launch is suspended pending independent civilian safety review. Live testing, prototype trials, or any field activity involving civilian risk require written authorization from Nolan Campbell. Until clearance is complete, the facility remains inactive. NC. Mara read it twice. Her hand left the mouse. Elias had sent her looking for a monster. The first real file she found showed Nolan holding the door closed. She sat back. Her eyes moved to the window, to the city below, to the particular grey-blue light that meant Seattle was deciding whether to rain. Relief should have come. It didn't. Or it came wrong, tangled up with something she didn't want to look at directly. You were hoping he was clean before you looked. She closed the Ravnik folder. Her eyes moved to her bag. She went back to the search bar. C-47. Nothing. Mara stared at the empty results for a moment. Of course, a logistics document. Shipment records, invoices, destruction filings. That kind of paperwork lived in Whitmore Group's archives, not on Nolan Campbell's executive computer. She removed the USB and slipped it back into her wallet. C-47 destruction file doesn't close on the Whitmore side. Missing Whitmore record. Ask Richard Whitmore directly. She picked up her bag and left. Richard Whitmore was already in his office. Mara walked in before he could make her wait and closed the door behind her. He looked up from his desk. His face arranged itself into the version of concern he kept for situations that required managing. Mara? His voice carried the practiced warmth of a man who had learned to deploy it precisely. I didn't know you were coming in today. I need to ask you something. He set his pen down. The movement was deliberate enough to suggest he had already decided this conversation was going to cost him time he didn't have. Now? Mara held his gaze. Yes? He studied her. The blouse, the bag, the steady hands, the fact that she had not apologized for entering. What is it? Mara stayed near the door. Did Evelyn Campbell contact you before she died? Richard didn't answer right away. His hand moved from the pen to the edge of the desk, small, just enough, and she saw it. Why are you asking me about Evelyn Campbell? Mara watched his face. Because of C-47. The name did something to his eyes. His face stayed controlled, but the warmth left it. And what came through instead was older. Mara. His voice dropped. What exactly have you seen? Her pulse moved once, hard. He knows the file. That was enough. An old note. She met his eyes without blinking. Richard stood, slowly, the way a man stands when he wants the movement to look harmless. Where did you get it? Mara kept her eyes on his. Did Evelyn ask you about it? His jaw tightened. You're getting involved in something you don't understand. She held her ground. Then explain it. For a moment he looked almost tired. The mask slipping before he could catch it, then the door closed inside him again. There is nothing to explain. Mara nodded once. Small. It still cost him something. She saw that, too. She turned toward the door. Mara. His voice came before her hand reached the handle. Leave old files alone. She looked back. His face had gone still in a way she knew well. This wasn't a request. It was a warning delivered in the language of concern. Why? Richard's voice came back flat and certain. Because dead people don't come back just because you read what they left behind. Mara opened the door. No? Her voice came out quiet. But sometimes they tell the truth better than the living. She walked out. Richard waited until her footsteps disappeared down the corridor. Then he picked up the phone. Grant answered with irritation already in his voice, the way he always did when Richard called unannounced. Richard didn't ease into it. Those shipment invoices, the ones you told me to destroy after Evelyn Campbell died. He lowered his voice. C-47. Can they still hurt us? The irritation disappeared into a silence that lasted 1 second too long. Why are you asking me that? Richard lowered his voice further. There may be an audit. No. Grant's voice cooled into something flat and precise. Mara asked you. Richard looked toward the closed door. She doesn't know anything. Grant's answer came without hesitation. If she asked about C-47, she knows enough to keep asking. Grant. Richard's grip tightened on the phone. She is my daughter. Grant's voice came back without a pause. Then you should have kept her away from Nolan. The line went dead. Richard stood with the phone in his hand and looked at the door she had walked through. For years, Mara had been a calculation he could defend to himself. This morning, for the first time, she looked like a consequence. Grant lowered the phone. Preston was sitting across the room with one ankle over his knee, a glass in his hand, watching. The bruising across his nose from Nolan's fist had faded to yellow at the edges. What? Grant crossed the room without answering. He took the glass from Preston's hand in one motion. Preston's hand stayed in the air after it was gone. Grant threw the glass into the fireplace. It shattered against the stone. The sound filled the room. Preston went very still. Grant turned to face him. His voice, when it came, was quiet, which was worse. You had one job. Preston's mouth tightened. If this is about Mara, it has always been about Mara. Grant stepped closer. She was supposed to trust you. Stay close. Give us access to what she heard, what she found, who she talked to. Preston's expression hardened. She was nothing when you picked her. Grant's answer came without inflection. She was useful, and now she is in Nolan's house, asking about a file Evelyn Campbell died trying to reach. Preston's face changed. What file? Grant looked at him until the question lost its strength. The kind that gets someone killed. The fire was moving behind the grate. Preston's jaw tightened. He looked at the scattered glass on the stone. Grant turned to the window. Outside, Seattle had gone bright and clean, as if morning had no idea what men did behind closed doors. Find out where she is. Preston stood. Grant's voice stopped him at the door. And this time, don't go near her like a boy who thinks wanting something makes it his. Preston looked back. Anger moved across his face. Grant didn't blink. Be useful. Mara was still turning it over in her head when the elevator reached the archive floor. She had the code from Evelyn's notebook. She didn't know what it would tell her. Whitmore Logistics kept its old records 2 levels below the executive offices in a cold room lined with metal cabinets and long work tables. The air carried the particular smell of paper that hadn't been touched in years. Andy was already there. He was working through a stack of delivery reports when she came in, reading glasses low on his nose. He had been at Whitmore longer than most of the executives upstairs. He looked up. Mara, didn't expect to see you down here. I need help with an old Campbell record. She set her bag on the nearest chair. 5 years back? Andy pushed his chair back and pulled off his glasses. What are we looking for? She opened the system at the nearest terminal and typed the code from Evelyn's notebook. C-47, Campbell Defense. Closed. Hard copy archived. Restricted access. Andy leaned in beside her. Whatever easy manner he'd had when she walked in was gone. That file is locked, Mara. She kept her eyes on the screen. Whitmore tracks Campbell Defense Logistics. I need you to pull a destruction file. Andy logged in under his clearance, opened the secondary archive system, and entered the code again. The system asked for a physical box reference. Hard copy, he muttered to himself. He crossed to the storage wall and pulled open the drawer marked by year. Mara stood by the desk, one hand closed around the strap of her bag, watching the door. Andy came back with a grey file box and set it on the work table. The folder inside was thin. He pulled out the first page, and Mara saw the stamp before she saw the text. A destruction file. Andy read in silence. On the second page, something tightened in his jaw. Not surprise, exactly. The look of a man reading something he had suspected but not wanted to confirm. It was opened as a destruction file. His voice came out careful. Mara kept her face still. Meaning? It was supposed to be destroyed. His finger moved down the page, stopping on a line. But it was delivered to Black River Holdings. Who is Black River? Andy went back to the computer. He checked the old vendor registry, waited while the record loaded, and then went still. He looked from the screen to her. Why are you digging into this? Mara's fingers tightened around the edge of the desk. Andy! He turned the monitor just enough for her to see the line. Registered contact, Grant Atkins. Mara was still turning it over in her head when the elevator reached the archive floor. She had the code from Evelyn's notebook. She didn't know what it would tell her. Whitmore Logistics kept its old records 2 levels below the executive offices in a cold room lined with metal cabinets and long work tables. The air carried the particular smell of paper that hadn't been touched in years. Andy was already there. He was working through a stack of delivery reports when she came in, reading glasses low on his nose. He had been at Whitmore longer than most of the executives upstairs. He looked up. Mara, didn't expect to see you down here. I need help with an old Campbell record. She set her bag on the nearest chair. 5 years back? Andy pushed his chair back and pulled off his glasses. What are we looking for? She opened the system at the nearest terminal and typed the code from Evelyn's notebook. C-47, Campbell Defense. Closed. Hard copy archived. Restricted access. Andy leaned in beside her. Whatever easy manner he'd had when she walked in was gone. That file is locked, Mara. She kept her eyes on the screen. Whitmore tracks Campbell Defense Logistics. I need you to pull a destruction file. Andy logged in under his clearance, opened the secondary archive system, and entered the code again. The system asked for a physical box reference. Hard copy, he muttered to himself. He crossed to the storage wall and pulled open the drawer marked by year. Mara stood by the desk, one hand closed around the strap of her bag, watching the door. Andy came back with a grey file box and set it on the work table. The folder inside was thin. He pulled out the first page, and Mara saw the stamp before she saw the text. A destruction file. Andy read in silence. On the second page, something tightened in his jaw. Not surprise, exactly. The look of a man reading something he had suspected but not wanted to confirm. It was opened as a destruction file. His voice came out careful. Mara kept her face still. Meaning? It was supposed to be destroyed. His finger moved down the page, stopping on a line. But it was delivered to Black River Holdings. Who is Black River? Andy went back to the computer. He checked the old vendor registry, waited while the record loaded, and then went still. He looked from the screen to her. Why are you digging into this? Mara's fingers tightened around the edge of the desk. Andy! He turned the monitor just enough for her to see the line. Registered contact, Grant Atkins. The corridor outside the archive was busier now. People had arrived. Doors were open. Voices moved through glass. The building had put its mask on. Mara walked through it with the folder in her bag and her face carrying the calm she had learned from the men who had underestimated her. Her phone buzzed before she reached the elevator. Nolan's name on the screen. Where are you? Mara stopped. The elevator doors opened in front of her. She let the people inside pass, then looked at the message again. Mara typed one sentence. I'm coming to you. She sent it and stepped into the elevator, the folder pressed flat inside her bag. Michael came into Nolan's study without knocking. He was moving fast, phone already in his hand, his face stripped of its usual control. Boss, you need to see this. Nolan was behind his desk, reading through a set of reports. He looked up at Michael's voice, and whatever he saw on the man's face made his hand leave the paper. Michael crossed the room and held out the phone. Whitmore garage camera, 15 minutes ago. The footage was grainy, angled from above. George's black car sat in the Whitmore underground garage. A man in a dark hoodie moved beside it, head down, face lost inside the hood. He bent near the rear tire, reached under the chassis, and stayed there for 3 seconds. Then he walked away. Nolan's jaw locked. His eyes went to Michael's and stayed there. "Where is the car?" Michael was already checking the tracker. "On the private road, 6 minutes out." Nolan's hand left the desk. "Call George, get them out of the car." Michael lifted the phone to his ear. Nolan was already moving. "Boss?" "Now, Michael." He crossed the study, opened the door, and walked into the corridor. The house blurred around him. Marble, staircase, morning light through tall windows, men turning as he passed, voices starting and stopping. The front doors were already open before he reached them. Morning air hit his face, so did the gate. The long drive stretched ahead of him, clean and pale under the morning light, leading toward the iron gates, where the road curved in from the trees. For 1 second, his body remembered before he did. Heat, glass, smoke. Evelyn's name tearing out of his throat. His hand shook once at his side. Then the security radio cracked. "Car is stopping. George has stopped the car." Nolan stepped down onto the front drive. The first step nearly took his breath. The second tried to take his balance. He kept walking, then faster, then running. Behind him, Michael's voice cut through the air, sharp enough to split the morning. "Move! Get the team to the drive!" George slammed the brakes so hard Mara's shoulder hit the seatbelt. "What happened?" George did not answer. His phone was still in his hand, Michael's voice coming through it loud and broken. "Get her out now! Out of the car, now!" George was already out. He pulled her door open. "Miss Whitmore, out, now! George, now!" Something in his face stopped her from asking again. Mara grabbed her bag and stepped out onto the road. The morning air touched her skin, mild and bright, and somehow wrong for the fear moving through it. She turned toward the house and saw him, Nolan, running toward her from the direction of the estate. His face had lost color. His hair had come loose from its perfect shape. Men were moving behind him, but Mara barely saw them. For one impossible second, her mind could not make the image fit. Nolan Campbell was outside, past the doors, past the steps, moving toward the gate, toward her. Her hand tightened around the strap of her bag. "Nolan?" He was still too far away to hear her. Then his voice broke across the drive. "Mara!" The sound went through her whole body. Her name tore out of him, raw and open. Her legs were already moving before the thought formed. The bag, the folder, George shouting behind her, none of it registered. Only the distance still between them, and the fact that her legs couldn't close it fast enough. She ran toward Nolan. His eyes were fixed on her with a terror she had never seen in him, something older than fear for himself. "Mara, move!" She was almost to him when she heard the sound. A small click. Too small for what came after. Nolan reached her at the same moment the car exploded. The blast ripped through the morning. Heat hit first, then sound, then the road disappeared under her feet. Nolan's arms closed around her before she understood she was falling. His body turned hard against hers, taking the force, pulling her down and away as the air split behind them. The explosion threw them across the gravel. Mara hit the ground with Nolan over her. For 1 second, the world disappeared, only smoke. Ringing his weight over her, his hand at the back of her head, and somewhere behind them, George's car burning close to the gate where Evelyn Campbell had died. Nolan walked through the wide iron gates of the estate with Mara in his arms, his eyes never leaving her face. Behind him, George's car was burning in the road, flames climbing through black smoke while men shouted across the drive, and Michael's voice cut through the chaos. Nolan did not look back. One arm was locked beneath Mara's knees, the other was holding her against his chest as if the blast might still reach for her if he loosened his grip. He crossed the place his body had refused for 5 years, carrying her through it. Mara's head was resting against his shoulder. She could feel his heartbeat, fast, not the controlled pace she'd come to know from him, but something raw, something that told her what his face wasn't showing. Her lashes trembled once, then lifted. For a moment her eyes could not hold the world. The sky was moving. Nolan's face was moving above her. A thin line of blood ran from his temple toward his cheek. "Nolan!" His gaze dropped to her instantly. "I'm here." Her lips parted. The words came slowly, pulled through pain and smoke. "You saved me." His jaw tightened. He kept walking. "Don't talk." Her fingers rose weakly toward his face. They did not quite reach the blood at his temple. "You're bleeding." His eyes stayed on the drive ahead. "It's nothing." He ran to me, she thought. Outside. He ran to me. The full weight of it hadn't arrived yet. Her body was still back there, the pressure, the ground gone. But that one fact cut through everything else. Her eyes sharpened for half a second, panic cutting through the haze. "George?" "Alive." Nolan's voice stayed low, firm enough for her to hold on to. "Michael has him." She closed her eyes again, but her hand found his shirt and clutched the fabric. She was aware of two things with equal clarity: the warmth of him, solid and real, and the bag still hanging from her shoulder. The notebook inside it, the copies. She pressed her face against his chest. Nolan carried her up the front steps. The doors were open. Edith stood just inside and went pale when she saw them. "Clear the living room," Nolan ordered. Edith moved before the words finished. Michael came in behind them, smoke on his jacket, phone still at his ear. "Ambulance is on the way. George is conscious. Adamski is 3 minutes out." Nolan carried her into the living room and lowered her onto the couch carefully. The same deliberateness he used for everything, even now, even with smoke still in his hair and blood drying at his temple. A cut ran along her forearm where the gravel had caught her. She hadn't felt it until now. Mara caught his wrist before he could straighten. "No hospital." He looked at her face. "Mara." "No." Her fingers tightened. "Please, don't let them take me away from here." He sat beside her at once, one hand covering hers. "They will check you here first." Her breathing caught. "Don't leave." The words came out smaller than she intended. Nolan leaned closer. This close, she could see the effort it took him to keep his expression level, the line in his jaw, the way his eyes moved over her face, the way a man's do when he is cataloguing damage and trying not to show what it's costing him. "I'm not leaving." Her eyes were searching his face as if she needed to confirm what she'd heard. "Only with you," she whispered. "I'm only safe with you." He lifted her hand and pressed it once against his chest, his heartbeat still fast. "Stay with me, then." Her gaze shifted toward the bag that had fallen beside the couch. The zipper had opened in the blast. A corner of the folder showed through. "There it is. Nolan!" His hand tightened around hers. "Don't try to talk now." Her eyes were fighting the heaviness pulling at them. There was something she needed him to know, something that couldn't wait for her to feel better, because if she waited, she might lose the courage for it. "My bag." Her voice came thin but certain. "There's a file. You need to look at it." He followed her gaze to the floor, then back to her face. "You're bleeding. Let me look at you first." Nolan's eyes moved to the bag. Mara's eyes moved to the bag. "Look." He reached inside. His fingers touched the black notebook first. He pulled it out. His thumb stopped on the cover. On the first page, the initials were still there in Evelyn's careful hand. E.J.C. Nolan did not move. Mara was watching his face. She had known this moment was coming since she found the notebook, had told herself she would look away, give him privacy for whatever crossed his face when he saw his wife's initials in someone else's hands. She couldn't look away. His fingers curled once at the edge of the cover, then stilled. His jaw flexed, his inhale slowed, barely visible, the kind of breath a man takes when he is deciding not to let something show that very much wants to. "I'm sorry," she thought. "I'm so sorry." His voice, when it came, had changed. "Where did you get this?" She pressed her palm flat against the couch. "The file first." He set the notebook on his knee and reached into the bag again. He pulled out the plain folder. The first page opened across his knee. Mara was watching him read. He read it once. Then again. His jaw flexed. A muscle near his temple tightened and held. His hand closed around the edge of the folder slowly. The kind of slow that costs something. Her eyes went to the notebook. "Open it." Nolan looked at her. Her fingers pressed weakly into the couch. The marked page. He opened it. The ribbon she had placed there fell across his hand. Evelyn's handwriting waited near the bottom of the page. C-47 destruction file doesn't close on the Whitmore side. Below it, smaller. Missing Whitmore record. Ask Richard Whitmore directly. Nolan's eyes closed, only for a second. Mara's eyes were filling before she could stop them. She was watching his face. The closed eyes, the hand still flat on the page, and something in her chest was pulling tight and not letting go. When he opened them, she couldn't look away. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I had to look." Her voice trembled, but she held his gaze. "I know I had no right, but my family's name was in it." Nolan looked at the file. His voice came very quiet. "Who owns Black River?" Mara's fingers tightened around his wrist. "Grant Atkins." Nolan did not speak. His jaw flexed. Grant Atkins. His sister's husband, the man who had sat at his table for almost 26 years. He had ordered those prototypes destroyed because they were too dangerous to exist. Weapons that should never have left the facility, never have reached anyone's hands. And Grant had taken them, sold them, built a company on them. Evelyn had found out. And Grant had made sure she couldn't tell anyone. The stillness that settled over him was different from the ones before. Not controlled, not managing. The kind that arrives when a man finally has a shape for something that has been shapeless for 5 years. Michael appeared in the doorway with the paramedics behind him. Mara's hand locked around his. "Don't let them take me." Nolan leaned over her. His lips pressed against her forehead. Slow, certain, the way you touch something you came too close to losing. Then his voice came, low enough that it belonged only to her. "No one is taking you from me, Mara." 6 months later, on a Sunday that had no business being that sunny in Seattle, Nolan and Mara Campbell were on the living room couch, and had been for some time. Mara's hand was in his hair. His was at her waist, pulling her closer in the particular way that suggested he had no intention of stopping. The television was on somewhere in the background, low enough that neither of them had been paying attention to it until the anchor's voice sharpened and cut through everything else. In a verdict that closed one of the most closely watched trials in the Pacific Northwest, Grant Atkins, former sales director of Campbell Defense Industries, was sentenced yesterday to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the bombing death of Evelyn Campbell, finance director of Campbell Defense and wife of company founder Nolan Campbell. The attack, which for 5 years had been attributed to Russian organized crime, was found to have been orchestrated by Atkins to conceal the theft and illegal sale of weapons prototypes. Nolan Campbell was cleared of all related allegations. Preston Atkins received 10 years for obstruction and concealment of evidence. Richard Whitmore, former chairman of Whitmore Logistic Group, received a concurrent sentence of 10 years for his role in the destruction of the C-47 logistics record. The court ruled that... Nolan reached forward and turned off the television. The room went quiet again. Mara stayed where she was, her cheek against his shoulder, listening to the sound of his breathing settle. He closed his hand around hers once and held. "It's done," she thought. "It's finally done." She let him have the silence for as long as he needed it. Then Nolan moved. The way a man moves when he needs to be standing instead of sitting. He crossed to the middle of the living room and stopped. Mara was watching him from the couch. His eyes had found the buffet. The silver frame, Evelyn's face, caught mid-laugh, the sun in her hair, looking at whoever had been holding the camera as if there had been nothing else worth looking at that afternoon. He was quiet for a long moment. "Mara." She came to stand beside him. He turned toward her. His hand moved through her hair once, slow. "You took this out of the drawer and brought it in here." She looked at the photo, then at him. "Evelyn was a part of you. She might be the reason we're standing here at all." Her hand found the back of his arm. "I'm not going to erase her, Nolan. That was never something I wanted." He pulled her toward him. His hands came to her face, both of them, unhesitating, and kissed her. Something along her spine came fully awake. She could feel it in the warmth of his palms against her cheeks, the particular quality of his grip. A man who had always been careful with things he valued and was not being careful now. Mara's hands found his shirt and held on. When they finally pulled apart, she was breathing faster than she'd intended. Justice, Evelyn. This, all of it landing at once, in the same Sunday afternoon. Nolan's forehead came to rest against hers. His hands were still in her hair. We never had a honeymoon. His voice carried something easy in it, something new. She laughed, a real one, surprised out of her. No, we did not. His hand came up to her face, his thumb moving gently across her cheek. Where would you like me to take you? His eyes stayed on hers. Paris, Cannes, Marrakesh? Mara looked up at him. Careful. At this rate, we'll never get you back inside. His mouth found the side of her neck. When he spoke, the words came low against her skin. I've got 5 years to make up for. His lips moved to her jaw. Pick somewhere. Mara tilted her head as if she was giving this serious consideration. She pressed her lips together. She looked up at the ceiling. Her fingers found the open collar of his shirt and traced along it slowly. I think, her voice came out perfectly innocent, that we should send all the staff home and spend some time alone, here. The corner of his mouth moved. That particular version of the smile, the one that had never fully committed for as long as she'd known him, it committed now. Oh, is that so? Her fingers ran slowly down his arm. We have a very, very nice house, and big, lots of rooms. His hands closed around her waist and lifted her in one motion. She made a sound of surprise that turned into a laugh as he carried her the 3 steps to the dining table and set her down on the edge of it. He stepped in close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, close enough that thinking straight was going to require some effort. His mouth found the side of her neck, her eyes closed, then his lips at her ear. The warmth of his breath there made something run along her spine that she was not going to describe to anyone. Oh, she whispered. So that's what we're doing. His voice was low against her skin. You were saying something about the house. I was. She was having some difficulty remembering what. It's a very... Oh, yes. Very nice house. His mouth moved lower, from her neck down to her collarbone. Her spine curved toward him before she decided to let it. Her fingers found the top button of his shirt. She worked it loose very slowly, keeping her expression perfectly neutral. Maybe, she kept her voice very casual, we could continue with my current project while we're here. He pulled back just enough to look at her. She met his eyes with the most serene expression she could manage. He always was fast. His hands moved to the outside of her thighs. He drew her toward him, slow and certain, giving her every opportunity to reconsider, until there was no distance left between them. The breath left her body before she could stop it. His eyes stayed on her face. So, the word came low and deliberate, landing somewhere below her ribs. You want a little Campbell. Mara looked up at him. Her hands had found their way to his shoulders without asking her permission. I like the trying. The words came out warm, with the edge of a smile she wasn't trying to hide. The controlled patience in Nolan's face came undone at the edges, warm and certain, and entirely his. Both hands came to her face. His lips found hers, hungry, pulling the breath from her mouth like he couldn't get close enough. His lips barely left hers. I love you, Mara. The words came out as breath against her mouth. Low, almost soundless, the kind of thing that gets said once and means it. She stopped deciding. He pulled her closer, and she pulled him in, and her lower lip caught between her teeth from the sheer pleasure of it. Nolan touched Mara like a man who had finally forgiven himself for living. And Mara, for the first time in her life, gave herself to someone who actually wanted all of her, every guarded, hungry, impossible part. Somewhere across the room, Evelyn's frame caught the light, and outside, for the first time in 5 years, the gates stayed open. Some wounds don't heal. They just find the right hands. My dear viewers, thank you for staying with Mara and Nolan's story all the way to the end. I hope you loved it. 2 people, each carrying wounds the other couldn't see at first. And in finding each other, they found their way back to love. How beautiful is that? Now I have a question for you. How many times have you fallen in love? Are you someone who believes in only one true love, or has love knocked on your door more than once? I'd love to know every single one of your stories. Please share them in the comments, and please don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support is what motivates me and brings me back with even better stories. See you until next time.